Hi, how are you? Good, good. Is this a hot mic? Hey. Good morning. Welcome to CMS's Reverse Industry Day. And welcome to those of you, I think we've got a dial-in number and or a live YouTube viewing of this morning's session. So would like to take this opportunity to welcome our industry partners and welcome CMS staff that are participating in this event this morning. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Melissa Starinsky, and I'm the Director of the Office of Acquisition and Grants Management in CMS, and I'm absolutely delighted that we're here today to bring in some of our industry partners to learn from them as a member of our acquisition team to enable us to do a better job of working collaboratively together to execute on the CMS mission. So as I was thinking about today, I was reminded of one of the Federal Acquisition Regulations guiding principles, and I know my OAGM colleagues are well familiar with this book. This is our regulation that governs the contracting work that we do across the entire federal government. And I was reminded of one of the FAR guiding principles that's in the very beginning of the FAR, and it talks about the acquisition team. And I just wanted to take a moment to read that to you because oftentimes, I think sometimes we forget that our industry partners are not necessarily a member of the acquisition team, but it is explicitly clear in the Federal Acquisition Regulation that they are just that. So I wanted to read this to you, and this again is one of the FAR guiding principles. The acquisition team consists of all participants in government acquisition, including not only representatives of the technical, supply, and procurement communities, but also the customers they serve and the contractors who provide the products and services. And so I think that's something that sometimes gets lost as we go about our daily work. And I just wanted to remind us that our contractors are a member of the acquisition team. And certainly we have to maintain the integrity of the process and maintain an arm's length relationship with our industry partners, but they are integral and critical to the acquisition process. So incredibly grateful of our industry partners to take time out of their busy schedules to come here this morning and educate us. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, and this has been going on now probably for a decade or more, and it actually prompted the Office of Management and Budget, the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, to issue a Mythbusters campaign about the importance of industry-government collaboration and exchanges. And so I personally am a fan of venues like this where we can come together in a neutral environment and we can share and learn with one another. And in my opinion, I think we need to be doing more of this because I think it will enable us collectively to spur more innovation, foster greater competition, drive greater value in the contracts that we're establishing with our vendor partners. So I hope that this is the beginning of many more days like this to come, many more informal exchanges with industry. The Federal Acquisition Regulation actually is explicitly clear that we're allowed to talk with industry, and we should be talking with industry. Again, we need to be careful in those exchanges with industry, and if we do it right, I firmly believe that it will enable a better acquisition system, greater value for mission execution. So, a couple other comments I wanted to make. I wanted to thank our OAGM staff that did a lot of behind-the-scenes work, as well as our industry partners, to get to where we are today. Unfortunately, Jason Vollmer, who is Group Director for our Acquisition and Grants Group, he's not able to be with us here today, but he was the delivery lead on making today happen. And he did a great job, and so wanted to acknowledge and thank Jason. Also wanted to acknowledge and thank some of our other OAGM staff that really helped with a lot of the planning and logistics, including Chris Hadjapanos. I don't know if I see Chris. He's somewhere. There he is over there. Carol Seville, Craig Dash, Paul Snyder, and I'm sure I'm probably forgetting others, but thank you all for all of the behind-the-scenes work that you did to get us to where we are today. Also want to thank our CMS senior leadership. Jenny Main and Karen Jackson, who have been incredibly supportive of this event. And so we're really fortunate that we've got such senior leadership support for events like this. Did also want to acknowledge and thank the Professional Services Council, Bradley Saul, the Woodlawn chapter of the National Contract Management Association, Suzanne Charleston, who also did a lot of behind-the-scenes planning and coordination for today's event. And I'll be inviting them up momentarily to share some opening remarks with you. But truly, it's been months of planning, a true collaboration, and I'm really hoping to, I'm really interested in listening and hearing about your insights to enable us to work better together moving forward. And then finally, just a few housekeeping notes for you. We don't have any set breaks in the next 3 hours, so if you do need to step out to take a call or visit the restroom, just please feel free to go about doing that. And then we also plan to post materials on OAGM's website in a couple of weeks. So with that, I would like to invite Bradley Saul up to the podium, representing the Professional Services Council. So thank you and have a great morning.
Thank you very much, Melissa, and thank you to CMS and the entire team for making this program possible. I think the tone at the top with Melissa, Derek, Jason, the entire team here has been tremendous to work with, a breath of fresh air. Again, my name is Bradley Saul, Vice President of Civilian Agencies for the Professional Services Council. Many of us know us as PSC. However, I should distinguish us from the HHS Program Support Center, which we are not. They're government and we are industry. And we're an industry trade association made up of over 400 technology and professional services companies serving large, medium, small companies and across the entire government customer set, defense, civilian, HHS, VA, DHS, et cetera. Very pleased to work with NCMA Woodlawn on this program. NCMA is a association, a partner of the Professional Services Council. I'm a member of NCMA Woodlawn, so glad to work together with them on making this day possible. We've done about 20 of these Reverse Industry Day programs as PSC across the federal government, and so there's some common themes that certainly come out in all of them, but a lot of these programs certainly are very much tailored to the agencies that we're dealing with. So you have an outstanding group of industry partners today that know CMS well and have certainly some tailored insights that I think you'll be very interested to hear from today. When we do these Reverse Industry Day programs, there's some basic ground rules. No sales purchase from the stage, and certainly no complaining about a past prior procurement. So this is really a safe environment to hear from industry. And so I have kind of two challenges for you today. One, while there's certainly some messages that the sessions will convey up front, when you get to that Q&A session, this is your time. This is really your opportunity to ask that question you've always wanted to ask industry in a safe environment without an RFP on the table. Why do you guys do that? Or why are you guys always calling me so much? Whatever question you have, this is the time to get it answered. And then secondly, I'd like to challenge you also to really think thoughtfully about some of the message that you hear from the stage and think about your workload back on your desk. So when you get back to your office this afternoon or tomorrow, what procurements are you working on that you may want to potentially rethink or incorporate some of the things that you're hearing from the stage today to enhance your industry engagement and hopefully your overall acquisition outcome. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here, and I'll introduce Suzanne.
Good morning. It's nice to see so many friendly faces. I'm Suzanne Charleston. I'm with LexisNexis, but I also have the honor of serving as the 2018 and 19 NCMA Woodlawn Chapter President. I've got a couple of our folks here who've been very helpful along the way, Dan Kane, who is a former CMS person, and Dorothy Callahan. So I want to say thank you to them for their help as well. And for those of you who don't know, the National Contract Management Association is about the only resource that's out there that provides you with education, credentials, networking, and publications about today's contracting world. It's really a great resource for not only continuing education for yourself while you're in the government, but for also the folks who are out there in the private industry as well. This is what we do. These are the services that we provide to the government, and together we need to make sure that the educational components are sharp, up to date, and available to you. So within the Woodlawn chapter, we have committees, and we're very fortunate to have government co-chairs along with us. Anita Allen is in the audience. Anita is actually a co-chair of our Small Business Committee. So what we like to do is have an industry person and a government person, and together we work to serve both sides of the industry, both government and then private sector as well. And we hope as you move along today that you consider becoming a member of NCMA as well. Our chapter is very pleased, just to echo some of Bradley's comments, to partner with PSC today. We think that the value for the Reverse Industry Day benefits both private industry and the government itself. The participants that you'll see today on the panels are from both our memberships. There's some overlap, but they represent large and small businesses currently doing business with the government. Some of them are former CMS folks, some of them have been in private industry, some of them are strictly contract professionals as well. So you're getting a very deep, wide, and varied presentation today along the three panels, and we hope that this will garner a conversation, because that's our goal. Our goal is to share you what we're thinking, some of the concerns that we have, or how we approach acquisition, for whether it's from the very beginning stages through innovation, through debriefings. You're going to hear a little bit about all of that today. So we invite your questions. And finally, we want to thank you for the opportunity to come in and do this today. Bradley said it, Melissa has referenced it, but it really is a partnership that gets us all to the right goal. We all want to serve the mission and the focus of the government, and this is one of the best ways to do that. So thank you very much, and I hope you find today very informative.
Good morning, everyone. Quickly, I'm going to do some introductions of our panel, our first panel here this morning. My name is Matt Smith. I'm the president of Business Acumen Consulting Group, a small business. I've been working within the federal healthcare space, particularly CMS, for the past 18 years in various roles. I'm pleased to be the moderator of the panel this morning that's focused on strengthening acquisition planning through proactive industry engagement. I would like to briefly introduce our panel before we get started, though, and turn on the mics. So our first panel member, Cindy D'Annunzio, spent most of her career as a CMS employee. She started in the Office of Financial Management, managing the CMS budget, and also worked with the Centers of Medicare on the first MAC procurements. Her last few years at CMS were spent leading the CERT and PERM programs, focused on decreasing Medicare, Medicaid, and CHIP improper payments. Since leaving CMS, Cindy has led business development teams focused on working within agencies at HHS and is currently the Senior Vice President leading federal health information technology operations for Turning Point Global, a mid-sized company. Our second panelist is Whitney Owen, and she is the Director of HHS Markets for LMI, a large nonprofit business that has supported CMS for the past 23 years. In her role, Whitney is responsible for delivering all LMI's current HHS contracts, as well as helping to develop new business with her business development colleagues. She is the decision maker on bid, no bid decisions, teaming relationships, price for bid, and proposal approval before submission to HHS. Our third panel member, Tom Naughton, is the president of Maximus Federal Citizens Services. Mr. Naughton is responsible for the management and performance of the largest book of business for Maximus Federal Civilian Services, which includes benefit appeals, a large-scale federal consumer engagement center, as well, and he serves more than 54 federal and state agencies. Our fourth panel member, Frederick Dees, is the CEO and owner of Visual Connections. Visual Connections is a consulting firm headquartered in Windsor Mills, Maryland, with services ranging from artificial intelligence to medical review. and has clients in the federal business sector as well as the private business sector. Visual Connections is a small service-disabled veteran-owned business, an SBA hub zone business, a minority-owned business, a small disadvantaged business, and a certified Maryland minority and disadvantaged business enterprise. Our fifth and final member is Andrew Kahn. Andrew is the Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for National Government Services. NGS is a mid-sized business that services CMS through Medicare administration, digital health information technology, and clinical quality solutions. Please help me welcome our members of the panel. So Cindy, why don't you get us started off with this morning with talking about industry business development and capture process.
Certainly, and thank you, Matt, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be here, and thank you for giving your time to this presentation today. So I have one slide, so it shouldn't be that hard if we can get that one pulled up. And so like Matt mentioned, I spent most of my career here at CMS as a federal government employee. And I will be completely honest with you that when I moved to the other side, I had a lot of surprises. And so hopefully a lot of the things we'll talk about will shed some light on, I think, the surprising things. And one big thing was all the chatter that happens. There's so much chatter. We want to just hear what's going on, CMS, what's happening. So we really value a lot of the things that you do, and we'll talk about that, like the forecast and the budget document. A lot of those things are very valuable to us because we are just like gathering information as much as we can about what's happening at CMS. It's very precious to us. So here's the timeline, and I thought this would be helpful so that you can, as procurement officials, look at what is your timeline and how does that match up, or maybe it doesn't match up so well right now with ours. So it starts on the left side, and we're actually planning 2+ years ahead of time for procurements. And the first phase, I'll talk about who's involved in it and then some of the activities that we're involved in. So 2+ years before the RFP, we're doing marketing planning. So we're positioning and getting ready for the opportunities that are coming up in the future. We have involved a marketing manager, and then that depends on the size of the company. There's dual roles that a lot of people play in smaller companies, but there's a marketing focus this far ahead of time. And then you always have your business development or sales person involved in this part of the process as well. And what we're doing is we're deciding what services can we offer in a year or two that our customer needs. So we're developing that marketing plan. We're also often developing an account plan. So we're looking at CMS and we're figuring out what's the profile, how are they procuring, what are they procuring, are they using small businesses, large businesses, which vehicles? We're taking a snapshot of all of that and gathering that to decide what we want to do in the future to work with you. We're also attending industry days, conferences, and one thing that's wonderful is in August when CMS has the Convergence Conference. That's very helpful. We would love to see more procurement-focused conferences and industry days, and would also love to see center and office-focused industry days or conferences. That would be fantastic. So we'll be sprinkling in little, wishes that we have along the way. We're also putting together white papers, documents on our website to get ready and help customers understand our services and how they apply to what you might need in the future. I wanted to mention FOIA requests. It's not part of our marketing plan, but that request has to happen a year or two ahead of time. And this may be surprising because I remember when I was at CMS, I would get a FOIA request and I'd have like 5 days to respond to it, right? But when we put a request in, sometimes it does take a year or two to get a copy of that statement of work. It's a lengthy process, so we start that early. So then the next phase that we move into is actually identifying those specific opportunities and assessing them, qualifying them, deciding if they are ones that we want to pursue. So we're using a lot of tools, and Whitney's going to talk about the CMS forecast more, but that is a wonderful tool for us. It's very helpful in identifying and qualifying opportunities. We also use Deltek's GovWin tool, which you may not be familiar with, but this is amazing for us. I mean, we love this tool. And what Deltek does is they have researchers that pull data from all different sources, like FPDS, from USA Spending, from COs and other contracting officials in the agencies, and they pull it all into a snapshot of different opportunities that exist out in the federal government. So we use that to gather more data about opportunities that are coming up. We're also trying to cultivate a relationship with you, and that is really important to us. I'll be honest, if we don't know a customer at all, if we don't have the opportunity to talk to them and help them get to know us, it's often kind of scary for us to look at an opportunity if we're in that position. So that's really important to get buy-in and to feel like it's a quality opportunity to pursue. We're also often reaching out to contracting officials to say, can you tell me a little bit more about this opportunity? Can you describe it? And I've had great success in getting that type of information because we need to understand what the work is. And we're also often reaching out and asking, what's the procurement vehicle going to be? Because we need to figure out, can we bid on it? Can we not? We may have that vehicle, we may not. Do we need to build a partnership with someone or use an existing partnership if we can't bid as prime? So there's a lot of those types of things happening early in the process. We're doing gate reviews, and some call them bid decisions, and that's with our leadership where we sit down and we say, do we want to put resources to pursue this opportunity? And those are resources for proposal people, for maybe a capture manager that's helping us to move that opportunity along. So it's really early on that we're starting to focus on what do we want to spend our money on and making those decisions. So the critical items in qualifying that opportunity are knowing, can you do the work? Do you understand the work? And also, how about the incumbent? How are they doing? And what's the competition? If we think the incumbent is doing fantastic and the government hasn't put out an RFI or any type of indication that they might want something new, then that might make us pause a little bit. Maybe it's going to be hard to beat that incumbent. So that's really important in our decision process. And we just need plenty of lead time. So as you can see in the blue part, we're doing this really early. And then the next part we're moving into is the capture process. So we've said, yes, let's put resources towards preparing for this opportunity, and then we're pulling more people into the process. So now there'll be a capture manager involved, often a proposal manager, and also contracts and pricing, and solution people. We're already getting the solution people involved to start preparing for that RFP to come out. And I should say this is all in an ideal world, right? So this is our ideal world, and certainly things happen that change this a bit. And one thing that we don't like are what we call pop-ups, which is something that we didn't know about and we didn't prepare for or put resources towards. But, it comes out and we say, wow, this is an awesome opportunity. if we didn't know about it ahead of time and put resources towards it, we may not have any resources left. So that's what's, hard for us to be able to deal with those types of situations. So once we get in this capture process, I know you have matrices to look at an RFP and make sure that everything is included that you need to include, and we have the same type of matrix for the proposal. So we're already putting together what the proposal needs to include and making sure that we're covering all of that. And then we are solidifying our partnerships. So we're already going through contractual agreements during this yellow capture phase to decide who do we want to work with and what other companies maybe fill a gap that we don't fill. So we're already deciding these things, and I know Whitney will talk about it's kind of hard to do that unless you have all the information that you need in order to know the work and know the people that are needed to do it. And we're always revisiting that bid, no bid decision when we get more information from maybe the customer and from industry. We're always talking and sharing information, and as we gather that, we're always kind of revisiting what we want to do. And I'll mention that it's really important, again, through this whole process for us to be able to talk to you. And I know that can be challenging at certain points in the process. And I know I've also heard that a lot of times the contracting person would like to get involved in organizing a conversation with the program office, and that's great to know. For us, we want to be able to talk to you and understand your business better, and also share some thoughts that we have. So throughout this process, that's really important, and we hope to be able to do that more and more. So then we get the RFP, and we're in the proposal process. So we quickly bring more people into the process. We, again, assess the bid, no bid decision. Are there any surprises in the RFP that we didn't expect? All of that is looked at to make that decision. We're finalizing teaming. We're finalizing all of our partners' statements of work. So we're assigning work for each partner. And I never would have imagined this, but the proposal review process is just amazing. When I was in CMS, I thought, throw together a proposal in a couple weeks, that should be okay. I'm sure they have it all ready to go. Now, I know you're not all thinking that, but I thought that. I was pretty naive about it, and now seeing it from the other side, we have 4 at least reviews as we move through the process and as we develop and grow a proposal. So it's really a very thorough process. So that's the business development and capture process. And Matt, I guess, should I turn it back over to you?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, it does sound like a large amount of work goes into the overall business development and capture process. And I think we had, as a panel, had solicited questions that you guys may have had from a, burning or wanting to know type environment. So we received some of those back from our folks at OAGM, and we definitely thank them for their contribution. With that, I've got a question for Andrew. Related to the business development and capture process. Do you budget annually for a proposal capture cost?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. Yes, the business development and capture process, we typically have a budget every year for that process, and typically it actually could be 1 to 2 years, but we have a limited set of resources to do all the things that Cindy talks about. So the things like the forecast and being able to look out into the horizon is really critical for us. And really the work effort around, are there big, large efforts happening? Is our RFP coming out that's going to be a recompete for us? We need to factor that in. And really continuing to assess our budget and manage to our budget for the next year. So it's really critical for us to really understand what the horizon is for us and managing those limited resources.
Thanks, Andrew. So with that, we're going to move on to our next section, which, Whitney, the importance of pre-RFP activity to industry.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Good morning, everyone. Thanks again for the opportunity to be here today. So I'm going to talk first, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tom to finish up this section. And if you'll go to the next slide, please. This is really to inform you kind of more about our perceptions of some of these efforts. So on the OAGM side, you are probably not always intending how we perceive it, but as I often tell my teams supporting clients, the client's perception is reality, and so I always tell my teams, you've got to make it the way that they perceive it. So, and I'm not telling you have to do it that way. That's not what I meant to say, but this is how we perceive it, and I know that this isn't always your intent, but we wanted to inform you that some of these signals are how we are perceiving things. So hopefully this is informative to you of how we are perceiving some of these activities. So the amount of industry engagement around different procurements can vary. So that can often be perceived by industry as either favoring incumbents if there's not a whole lot of activity around a different procurement, or alternatively, if there is a lot of activity, maybe that incumbent's not doing so well, and perhaps CMS might be looking for a new entrant into that program. We're going to talk more about the CMS forecast, which Cindy alluded to, and that's a key business intelligence tool for all of us. And the different types of procurement strategy that CMS uses is really important for our partnering and ability to prime and all of that Cindy touched on. The use of industry days and different types of market research is important to us. And then Tom will talk more about the sources sought notices, or RFIs. So next slide, please. So the CMS forecast, and we did see that OAGM released a new forecast yesterday, so that was perfect timing for our conversation today, so thank you so much. But the CMS forecast is extremely helpful to us. It is a very useful tool to know what opportunities are coming out in the near or upcoming future for the agency. We use this tool to inform what opportunities we can pursue using the capture and business development process Cindy just talked about, and to assign our budgets that Andrew just talked about that we have allocated for the business development process. We use it also to talk to teaming partners. As we've talked about, all of us we're not working in a vacuum. So we have to work together to further the mission of CMS and other government agencies, because not all of us have access to every vehicle, as well as we can't all work every single procurement all the time. So we need to find the right partners, whether it's a small business set aside and a large business can't prime it, or it's on an IDIQ perhaps that someone may not hold. So we all are looking at that on the forecast. So the accuracy and completeness of the information is really important to us. And I know that I'm sure it's a lot of work for OAGM and the program offices to get that information, and it's no small task to get the forecast out. And I understand from some OAGM officials that you all are working to get out more forecasts, and I've seen that over the past few years, that more forecasts are being released each year throughout the year, which is really helpful as that information is updated. So thank you for that, and it's no small task, we're sure, but the more that information is included, even if it can change, that helps us in our planning to know, like I mentioned, about those teaming arrangements, which procurements are going to be viable for us, who we need to partner with. So that's all critical information, even if it's going to change. And it helps us to organize through this capture planning process. So the procurement strategy, it does matter to us. So all of us, I think all of us up here, we mentioned our incumbents within CMS. So limited distribution is helpful when you're an incumbent because it does limit the competition, but it can discourage competition. So when you are trying to either enter a new program area within CMS, or if you're a new entrant trying to come into CMS, that limited distribution is a challenge because you may not even know that procurement is happening, and you may have capabilities in an area that CMS is unaware of, that you could bring to that program office. So the limited distribution also, when it's sent to someone and you know that an incumbent is really strong in that program office, the feeling can be sometimes, well, they're just looking for someone to bid so that they can have a competitive procurement, but they really want the incumbent. So sometimes that's how it's perceived if we're not known to that program office, but it's sent to us unexpectedly, that's sometimes how we perceive that. So the indication on the CMS forecast or any other business intelligence that it's coming out on a particular vehicle can be a strong indication as well. So, for example, if it's a recompete for an incumbent and the incumbent is on that vehicle, perhaps they're doing well and they want to keep it with that incumbent. Or the opposite, if the incumbent is not on the vehicle that it's going to be coming out on, perhaps this is a really viable opportunity and they're not looking to keep that incumbent. So that can be really helpful information as well. Or perhaps it's been with a large prime for a long time, but all of a sudden it's going to come out small. So that's really helpful to know as well, because then it's helpful for smalls, obviously, to know that. Or if you're a large business, it's helpful to know that you need to find a small partner if that's something that you want to go after. So another opportunity, is RFQs released on FedBizOps or via eBuy to GSA schedule holders, could result in more competitive procurements. As I mentioned, some things come out on vehicles, and we're well aware that you all have these vehicles for a reason, and you are being mandated to use them more and more. But as I mentioned, sometimes there may be newer entrants into the agency who aren't holders of those vehicles, so they can partner on those vehicles to try to gain past performance on them. But looking for the most competitive procurements, I think, is always a wish in the industry. And then, of course, the small business set-aside information is critical to know in advance. And not just that it's going to go small, but my colleague down here, Fred, I think will talk about this more, but knowing which disadvantaged category of small business it's going to be placed in is helpful, so that when we are looking to team, if needed, on a small business procurement, we're not spending resources and time talking to small business and categories that won't even be able to bid on that work if it's set aside for a SDVOSB bid when we're talking to 8As. So we all have limited time and resources, so the earlier that set-aside designation can be known is really helpful. Okay, next slide, please. So we've all been talking about how much we want to engage with you. So industry days are a really powerful way to do that. Currently, and first of all, I think we all acknowledge and know how much work industry days are. So thank you for doing them, and we know that there's a lot of effort placed into them. But so far, it seems that industry days are being focused around really large procurements, which makes a lot of sense, but mainly around large vehicles or really large procurements. And this may not be your intent, but there's one perception that that industry has. So, for example, there was one procurement within the last year, 18 months, that was large, that did not have an industry day. And many teaming partners were coming to us at LMI wanting us to bid it, but there was not an industry day. And to us, that was a signal that perhaps CMS really wasn't looking to make much of a change from the incumbent. So we decided to no bid. That wasn't the only reason we no bid it, but the lack of an industry day on a procurement as large as it was a strong indicator to us that there may not have been much interest in new entrants into that procurement. So I would just encourage you to think about more, even if it's not a full-fledged industry day, more industry engagement on the larger procurements, even outside of large IDIQ vehicles is something to think about. The other thing with industry days is they're really helpful for industry partners to see who else you could potentially partner with, who else is interested in that procurement, as well as getting a sense of who the competition is. So it's helpful to go and see who you would be up against and/or who you could team with on that vehicle or that procurement. So it's helpful for just gathering intel on the opportunity, as well as the information that CMS puts out at those days is really helpful. So knowing, what's the scope of work going to be, what's the procurement timeline, what's the procurement strategy, how will it be procured, any kind of eval criteria, what the pricing evaluation, best value, however it's going to be procured, anything that can be shared at those industry days to help inform the bidding process is always valuable information. And another recommendation, and again, I know that this is probably a challenge because there's a lot of prep and planning that goes into those days, but the more you all can build in time to hear from interested vendors at those days would be beneficial. And that's hard because there's a lot of people that come to those days and want to talk to you. But even if it's not on the day, if there are ways following up to those events that you can engage with interested parties, I think that would be beneficial. And then aside from the quote industry days, other ways to engage in market research, meetings or research or capability discussions is another way that some program offices engage on those, I think are beneficial. And we heard some good feedback recently from our OAGM partners that industry needs to make sure that we bring the right people to those events. So not salespeople, sorry to our sales colleagues, but people who really know the technical capabilities of our company and can tell you what we would bring to the solution for your challenges to those events. But those types of events can be really beneficial to us to help understand what you're looking for and what your problems to solve are. And hopefully they're beneficial to you to learn more about a company you may not have known much about in the past. So I will turn it over to Tom now to talk about sources sought notices.
Thank you very much. So just a couple notes on industry perception related to sources sought notices and RFIs. So perception is that sources sought notices are generally used when a requirement is known and you folks are looking to see if there's any small businesses out there that are capable of doing the work. This is generally the rule. Sometimes we see sources sought notices that are not limited to small businesses. So large businesses continue to keep an eye on the sources sought notices, but overall, the general perception is CMS is looking to see if there's some smalls that can perform this work and if they're capable. Small businesses are obviously interested in making sure the work goes to small business or keeping it small business, and large businesses are generally not interested in driving things to small businesses or specific socioeconomic categories. So if you see a sources sought notice for a small business or 8A set-aside that is not a historical small business set-aside contract, a new requirement, many large businesses are not going to have too much interest in working with small businesses on responding to the sources sought notice because they're waiting to see whether it's going to go large or small. If it goes small, then yes, conversations will take place. But at the time of the sources sought notice, many large businesses are going to ask their small business partners to call them back if in fact it does go small and they need some help. And that's why I think in some of the sources sought notices, it asks the small businesses to provide their entire team. And in many instances, the small businesses are just not going to be able to get an entire team together or the most competitive team available because their large partners are still waiting to see whether the opportunity is going to go large or go small. Now, in instances where something has historically been small and industry believes it's going to stay small, I think you're going to get a more large business engagement with their small partners on the sources sought notices. Some folks, and I know it creates significantly more work for you, but some folks in industry feel that opening the sources sought notices to the full spectrum of competitors would give you guys a more thorough response as to the view of potential bidders that are out there. And then, next slide, please. As we go to RFIs, I think that's generally felt in industry as a more formalized sources sought notice, that there's a real opportunity and that we're moving through the procurement stage and that there will be an RFP sometime within the next 12 to 18 months. I think that one of the improvement areas in or modifications with RFIs is trying to include as many of the sections, relevant sections from the upcoming RFP that you can. It really would help potential bidders prepare better for the upcoming RFP and know the details of the work and provide more comments on their experience and how they can help you meet your requirements more thoroughly. I also think there is a percentage of RFIs that are responded to and the requirement goes away or strategy is changed, and industry does not really, at least I don't have a good insight as to when those requirements change or if it's a canceled requirement. So I think following up with the folks that respond to the RFI and letting them know, look, we're going a different direction here, or we're still in market research and there's not going to be any activity here for the next, excuse me, 18 to 24 months would certainly be helpful for people's planning and preparation. You respond to a large RFI, you're expecting a large procurement within 12 to 18 months. So you know, as Andrew mentioned, you're budgeting, you're preparing, you're getting your team ready because you think it's coming out, and then if you don't hear anything, you sort of need to redeploy those resources. So communicating changes in RFI and procurement strategy would always be helpful.
Thanks, Tom. So we kind of talked a little bit about this in the first section as well as this most recent section, and that's the teaming concept and the utilization of subcontractors. So to go back to some of the questions that we received from OAGM, I've got one for you, Cindy, dealing with how do you manage relationships with subcontractors, and what are the factors that go into determining how you're going to utilize them?
Well, we talked through a lot of the factors, like whether we think a procurement will go large or small. That's important to know very early, or as early as possible, so that we are partnering with the right company. Maybe we want to sub to a small if it's going to go small. And then we're also looking at partners that have complementary skills, or maybe they fill a gap that we don't have. So we complement each other and are able to fulfill all the requirements. And I mean, we're also looking at, there's a lot of partnering negotiations happening, because we may need a larger team, and that may mean a smaller amount of work for one company than another, but that's also going into the partnering decisions. And lastly, we have some partners that we work with a lot on different opportunities. So there are relationships that we will bring to multiple opportunities if it makes sense, because we have a relationship with a certain company. And it could be, someone completely new. So it really can go either way, depending on what the opportunity is and who we need to make the best team for CMS.
It's always about bringing the best solution. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, so, all of this, all the preparation and everything goes into developing the response to the RFP. So there's certain sections of that RFP that are extremely important, the B, C, L, and M to us as industry. And I think, Fred, you're going to talk a little bit about those importance and how it plays into our bid, no bid decision.
Yes, thank you. Excuse me. Good morning. This is where the actual party begins. For a lot of us, this is where we spend a lot of our vacations, summer vacations in hotels. This is where our Christmas holidays get. We spend a lot of time with turkey in our office, and so on and so on. But this is where the party begins. We know that the RFP has a huge amount of information. In this session, we're going to focus on BCL&M and talk about some of the importance that the information that is sent to us as a vendor on how that information is important to us. Next slide. Perfect. So as you guys are familiar with the uniform contract format, a lot of the information that's sent inside of the RFP and BCL&M allows us to be able to assess if we're actually going to go after this opportunity. Even if it's an opportunity that, as Cindy mentioned, where we looked at it for 2 years or 1 year, or even from looking at it in congressional hearings, even when the RFP lands, sometimes we take a look at it and come to find out that either we don't have the bandwidth to go after that opportunity because the time frame to respond is too soon. Sometimes there's something that's in the RFP from a technical standpoint that doesn't allow us to be able to bid. Sometimes there's information there from a pricing standpoint. It's a cost-plus contract. We don't have an approved county system, so on and so on. So there's different things that we're looking for when this RFP comes out. A lot of times for me, it comes out, when I take a look at it, I look at it probably within the first 2 or 3 days. I probably read it maybe 4 to 5 times. And a lot of times in our kickoff, we always say, well, I only read it 3 times. So we're still looking for more information as you read it the 4th and 5th time. This is also, too, the opportunity where we're determining if gaps exist within our, us as a prime or us as a partner. If we took a look at the opportunity, a year and a half or 6 months, and it come to find out they're looking for automation for testing, and we take a look at our team and say, you know what, we don't have someone that can address automation for testing. So that's when we start looking at other capabilities within the organization. We start looking for partners and so on and so on. And so it's really important for as much of that information in the RFPs so as to be able to figure out what to go next. This is also the opportunity for us to figure out if teaming is needed and what type of teaming is needed. If we're in a situation where the opportunity came out small, but they're looking for a particular system that we don't house internally, this is where we may possibly look at a large business that we've done business before or another small business that has specific experience in that space. So it's very important for us on that. This is also, too, is where we start looking to try to figure out how soon can we prepare the response. Typically, if an RFP come out on a Friday, typically over the weekend, we're pulling together templates, we're creating a matrix, and when that Monday comes, when everybody finally get a chance to start work, we're looking to try to figure out how we can respond quickly. Next slide, please. Okay. This section, this is where we focus on description of service. This is mainly what we're looking for. The type of contract, is it going to be firm fixed price? If it's T&M, it's a cost plus type contract. Industry, we found that especially the type of contracts is in technology development where we're developing a system. We found that hybrid contracts is very useful for us, where there's certain parts of the contract is firm fixed price, and then there's other parts of the contract where T&M, we found that really helps us when it comes to pricing. I know for us as a small and also as my large partners, when we see firm fixed price contracts, sometimes that can give us pause because we start thinking about scope creep. That's the first thing we start thinking about. Are we going to bid enough on this contract where we're in a situation where they say, okay, at first they wanted this, but then 2 months into the contract, they want more. And it was in that one bullet, but it come to find out that one bullet turns into 8 pages scope creep. So that's always a concern. That's why firm fixed price, T&M hybrids are really helpful for us. And also, too, knowing this information during the draft of the RFP is really helpful. We know that CMS regularly send out draft RFPs, especially under specific vehicles like Spark. That's really helpful for us to be able to see those draft RFPs, and also to get an opportunity to take a look at the instructions and see what type of contract the contract is going to come out in the draft stage. So it's great to see the technical parts of the RFP and the SOW or the SU but it's also really helpful if there can be more instructions and types of contracts in the draft stage. That's really helpful for us. Next slide, please. Okay, this section here is the specifics on the statement of work. Typically, we find this section to be fairly small. One of the things from an industry standpoint, we just want to make sure that this section is consistent with the SOW or the SOO. This is where we're looking for where if there's one sentence in this section that's completely different than what the SOW is looking for. So if the SOW is looking for a technology development, and then we look in this section and most of it is talking about testing. So we're looking for this section to be consistent with the SOW and the SOO. Next slide. All right, perfect. So down to the instructions. Now, in this section is typically where, from an industry perspective, we have a lot of the questions. As you guys see, this is where we take a look at the instructions, and I know it's to some it might not be a big deal, but this is where we're looking for the font size and different things like that. And I know everyone here in the room, you guys like stop asking about the font size. To us, that's very important. When we start looking at, proposal, if it's a 20-page response or a 30-page response, we start looking at, okay, if we can have that one particular table, if it's down to 9 points, or if there's a particular logo, if we can get it down to 8 points in that logo, we can have more room. And then as you're going through the proposal, a lot of times that could save 1 or 2 pages. So we definitely have a lot of information. So this is where, we're looking for to make sure it's a good fit for the organization. And similar to what Wendy talks about for us, some of the perceptions, sometimes when we see in the instruction there's a quick turnaround, or you guys are only looking for 10 to 15 pages, a lot of times that do feel like to us is that you're looking to sort of keep what you have and go back to the incumbent. So sometimes we see that information, and that's the way it makes us feel. It doesn't mean that's the actual truth. And sometimes, it's us, not you. I always say that, like in a breakup movie. So one of the things that's a key focus for us is that the instructions are clear and it's easy to follow. We find a lot of times when there's a table that sort of lays out, in this particular volume, we want to see this many pages, and then be able to be clear about the instructions with the font sizes. That's really helpful for us when we see that. And also, too, one of the things that's helpful when it comes to the questions we have about the instruction is to do your best, to get back the response to the questions as quick as possible. If there's, say, for instance, there's a large RFP where there are 200 questions that comes over, a lot of times if 50 of those are around instructions, it'll be great for us as a vendor if you guys could release those instruction questions first, and then get back some of the technical information, because sometimes, we're waiting to see if the font size is going to be 10 or 9 at the last minute, and then, come to find out we're now 5 pages over because, we can't be able to utilize a, 11 by 17 or something like that. So that's very important for us. Next slide, please. So now to the ratings part, section M of the RFP. So one of the things that's really helpful for industry that sometimes industry we struggle with is being able to grade high on the objective rating scale. We're all looking to become excellent, and we also too, at least I think from my organization, we think that all of our content is excellent, and everything that we put out there is the greatest idea ever. So, but a lot of times we get responses back that says not so. So giving it some information about what CMS is looking for from a standpoint of how to be able to rate higher. If there's a particular section that's asking for, say, risk management, and you guys can give some information on what you guys feel that would be excellent about risk management, if you had a risk score methodology or something like that that can help us sort of point us in the right direction on if we have experience or we have a specific methodology that can be able to enhance a particular capability, that would be considered excellent. Also, more details on what constitutes each of these elements. So strengths and weaknesses is always difficult, and it's similar to, about the objective rate weightings. More information about what CMS feels as is standard versus what they think would be a good idea is really important. For an example, agile. Sometimes we feel like every time you guys say agile, when we would submit a response and it's agile, that's great information. We think that's going to hit it out the park. But sometimes it comes back and say, well, that's basic agile. We was looking for a different type of agile. So I think just giving more details about that information would be really helpful. And that's pretty much all in my section.
Yeah, so thank you, Fred.
thank you.
As we all know, if you can't get the RFP in, all of the work that we do leading up to it is for naught.
That is correct.
So it's pretty important there. And with that thought process on the bid, no bid decision, I've got a question for you, Whitney, related to the bid, no bid decision, since you're responsible for those. As we know, Section B typically gives us the insight to the contract type that's going to be awarded. How does the contract type play into your bid, no bid decision? A firm fixed price versus a cost, especially due to the understanding of the statement of work, as Fred's already kind of mentioned. And what are the factors that you consider when looking at that?
Yeah, so from our perspective at LMI, we bid on all contract types, and we execute on all contract types. For us, and in our bid, no bid decision, it's really about how well-defined the requirements are. So an FFP contract type is very appropriate when there are well-defined requirements that are specified and the delivery is executable in that environment. I think what we see a lot of times is an FFP being applied where it's really a T&M environment. So there are TBDs in the statement, the schedule of deliverables, or things are on a recurring schedule, and so it's hard to know the quantity of deliverables. That's where it gets harder to deliver on a firm fixed price. Or where you're having surge in a contract, where you don't know the number of widgets that you're going to be reviewing or that you're going to be delivering or creating. That's where an FFP becomes more challenging. So the hybrid type cleanse that Fred mentioned, we've seen work very successfully in some of our contracts, where some cleanse are T&M and some are FFP. So I think that's a marriage of a good contract that is successful for the government and the contractor. So for us, it's not that we're scared of FFP, because we're not. It's just that there needs to be a clear understanding of what that delivery is and what the contractor is going to be held responsible for. One other thing I would say is that we don't like to ask for change orders at LMI, and I know a lot of vendors don't. So when you get into an FFP environment and there's scope creep, that's where it gets challenging. So I think that programs and OAGM where this is what I need, this is all I need, FFP can be a really good arrangement. But where the requirements are changing or you don't know, that may not be the best use of FFP.
So it really plays into the business risk
Right.
affiliated with it. So good to know. So our last section, Andrew, some recommendations and thoughts to go on?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. So just really to close us out before we open up for questions, I think we talked a little bit about our view, and hope you kind of got a perspective on what we do to go through the business development process. But we do have some recommendations on the next slide, and just some comments. Really, as Cindy talked about, our process takes usually a couple of years to go through for procurement as we work through into capture and then ultimately proposal. So it's a long process. The earlier the information that is out on the procurement, obviously, is the better. And I think Cindy talked about no pop-ups, so no surprises, because they're typically not in our forecasts and we haven't budgeted and planned and prepped for them from an industry perspective. From industry days, we talked about industry days and how valuable they are, and we really like when you do that, and we love to be a part of that. The forecast for us is critical, and we love the fact that it's coming out almost, I think it's monthly now, and that's just a great thing for us, a great tool for us. It gives us visibility into what's coming up the next quarter. If there's a multi-year forecast, we would really appreciate that as well. We know things change. Things can drop off and move, but it really gives us a lot of visibility into where CMS is headed and what procurements are coming up. So I think everyone's kind of touched on the forecast and how important that is. Fred talked about the details on the evaluation criteria. I think, again, the more specifics on that is important for us to understand that we're hitting the mark when we submit our bids into you. I think as Fred said, I think we all think, hey, we're excellent bids, and then it comes back and you're not so much. But I think really aligning that criteria with specifics of what CMS is looking for, I think is critical for us. But we need to do our homework as well, and I think that's clear. And I think as Melissa talked about our partnership and making this work, we need to make sure that we're understanding what your needs are, what your pain points are for particular procurements. How can we provide capabilities to that so that we're not just coming in and having conversations to say, hey, CMS, how can you grow our business? That's not going to work. We want to understand what you need and how we can help, and if we have capabilities to help you. And then really understanding that the competition is good, and I think that we understand and work with each other as either partners or competitors, and from a CMS's perspective, the more you can generate that, I think you're going to get better services from us. So just to wrap up, I think the process works when we are able to do our homework over that year plus, working with you, getting feedback, but also making sure that we have clear expectations from you, and really you can forecast what the future is for us, and really for us to hit the needs of the agency. So I think I just want to say that just to thank everyone for the opportunity to provide some of our view and perspective on this process. So thanks. I'll turn it back to you, Matt.
Thanks, Andrew. And so, basically, one of the things that I want to, wrap up with one of the questions before we open it up is a question to Tom and to Fred, really from a large business perspective and a small business perspective. Both of your organizations work within multiple agencies within the government. So how would you best describe the sales process at CMS compared to other civilian agencies within the government, and how you guys work through that with your organizations?
Tom?
Sure. So I think, overall, working with CMS as it compares to other agencies, in a lot of ways, and I am CMS-centric, but it's smoother than a number of agencies. I think a lot of the folks you have in procurement are open to have appropriate discussions and provide information as necessary, and are well-versed in the FAR. I think one of the things we always talk about with our folks is, how about you read the FAR before you ask that question, right? Let's not have the folks at CMS do our work for us, but when we do have questions that we're not sure the answer, or the answer is ambiguous, we've had good success in talking with CMS to get clarification on those issues. So I think, generally speaking, that back and forth works very well. I think the understanding of the FAR at CMS, I would have to say, is greater than other agencies that I deal with. I think the overall management of your IDIQs is a generally smooth procurement process. So I think overall, compared to other agencies, it works well. I think if you talk to folks in industry that are not incumbents at CMS, they would say, well, CMS is unique because they put significant emphasis on knowing their systems, knowing their policies, and if you're not an incumbent at CMS, it's going to be very difficult to get in the door there. We have to partner with a small business, we have to try and get on with another large business, and that's challenging for us. So from that perspective, the perception of the over-reliance on knowledge of CMS expertise may limit your innovations and your competition that you're getting in some areas. And I also think, just as in any organization, there are folks that communicate better and those that don't communicate as well. And so there's often opportunities that I never heard of that opportunity. Where did that come from? And these things do just sort of pop up, or you find out, well, they've been an incumbent for 25 years, and that's the way it's going to be. And I don't think that that's unique to CMS. I think that's just a common occurrence across government, that industry's not going to know all opportunities at all times, and there will be surprises, and you're going to have better success working with some people than others.
Definitely. I think I 100% agree with you, Tom. And I would like to actually, one of the biggest pieces, as Tom mentioned, what we found from CMS is that you guys really know your work. We do work inside of the DOD, and a lot of times we get these 1-2-page SOWs or SOOs, and they pretty much is looking for industry to get it right and to set the direction and all the above, which is perfectly fine. But CMS, we found that you guys' work are really spot on what you need and what you're looking for. We really appreciate that effort that you guys put into your RFPs. One of the things that we found that is a little bit different at some of the, especially inside of DOJ and DOD and at the Pentagon, is that they send less source of salt notices. Specifically, they spend more source of salt notice in a specific disadvantaged category. Instead of sending out a source of salt notice for 8As, hub zones, and SDVSBs and women-owned, they'll send out a source of salt, smaller window, maybe 1 week or 2 week, just for SDVSBs or just for 8As or just for hub zones. And then they take a look at that response, and they typically will look at how they performed the previous year. If they're low in SDVSBs or low in hub zones, they typically say, okay, we already know there's hub zones at CMS. We have 4, 5, 6, 7 of them already performing well. Let's just go ahead and push out a source of salt notice to hub zones. So DOJ does that a lot, and it's been really helpful for us as an organization, and that's one of the things that we found is different. But we definitely know that CMS know the work, and your RFPs typically are more technical, and it has more details. So one of the other things I want to say is my mom just learned how to use YouTube. So, hey, Mom.
Thanks, Fred. Thanks.
No problem.
So with that, we're going to open it up, the floor, to questions. There's a mic in the middle of the floor here, and if you want to direct it to one of the panel members, feel free. If you want it just answered by any of the panel members,
Is it on?
that'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on.
I have a 3-part question when you talk about sources sought notices. Number one, by the way, I'm the small business specialist here at CMS, and as that's the small business specialist, could you explain to me why we should open up a sources sought notice to all businesses, including largest? Because from my perspective is generally everyone knows that a large can do it. So what I'm working at is looking at trying to get things set aside for small. That's number one. Number two is you spoke about how larges won't partner with smalls when we're trying to set things aside, especially if it's something that was previously or has always gone to large business, and I've experienced that on many, many procurements here at CMS. So I would like to ask, what can I do as a small business specialist to try to get those procurements set aside, and I don't expect the largest to necessarily answer that question. And Fred, when you spoke about specifically sending out sources sought notices to a specific socioeconomic category, I've thought about that here at CMS, but one of the things I am told is, well, if we do a sources sought notice for service disabled and we don't get any capable responses, then we're not going to do it for HubZone, we're not going to do it for woman-owned. So I generally encourage all small businesses to be included so that when I'm looking at these, I can find a category and look at the socioeconomic categories first that CMS is not achieving those goals. So tell me how we could better do that.
Yes.
So let me take your first question, Anita, because that was more my comment from the panel, in that in general, we see the sources sought notices come out for small, but there have been occasions when they come out and they say large or small can respond. So we understood from a conversation last week that the intent is generally that it should only be for smalls. So the comment is more intended to raise the awareness that it doesn't come out consistently across OAGM that way. And if they are going to come out occasionally for large businesses, we, on the large side, would encourage more of them to come out that way, because there are capable large businesses that are not in that program office that could give, capable responses to a program office that may not be aware of them. So if the intent is for sources sought notices to just be for small businesses, that's not always how they're coming out. So that's the confusion on the industry side right now.
Tom?
What's the second question?
It's more about sometimes how large businesses don't want to partner
Sure.
with small businesses.
So, I think it's, from a large business perspective, if we know that an opportunity is going to go to a small business, there is willingness to partner with that small business during the sources sought notice time. So sorry if that was confusing. But if it's a known small business program that's going to stay small business, there is more willingness for a large business to work with a small on the sources sought notice and provide whatever assistance the small business may need. I think when it's a new opportunity that industry does not know, that simply because there's a sources sought notice that's going to end up going small, you may not get enough responses. So many folks in the industry, their initial reaction is going to say, look, this is probably going to go small. If it does, we don't know what category it's going to go. It could go 8A, it could be service disabled, it could be HubZone. So let's not jump into the sources sought notice with a partner until we know more specifics. A, is this actually going to go small? And if it is actually going small, what are the business categories that are going to be bidding on it? And that will give us, from a large perspective, a better idea of what partners we may be working with when it's a full procurement.
Okay. And I agree with you, Tom. I think this will be a great opportunity to beat up the large businesses, but I'm going to pass on that.
I appreciate
That's
that.
because Matt, he texted me this morning. But I agree. But I think, Nita, actually, your question directly has a lot to do with the large businesses not willing to, at times, not willing to support small businesses. And I think one of the reasons I found in my experience with working with large businesses is that if the sources sought notice is coming out and they're looking for 8A, STVSB, and all the above, they're not sure which category is going to land in. And so they don't want to pick 5 people or 5 companies because the response has to look different. So for large businesses to support 5 small businesses can be sometimes difficult. So I think one of the answers could be that leads to your question is around picking a category. So if large businesses see that it's going to come out HubZone and they're doing a sources sought HubZone and they have a favorite partner, hub zone company called Visual Connections,
Absolutely.
would, it would probably give them more idea of that, okay, CMS is definitely looking for this to go hub zone. This is an opportunity for us to partner with the hub zone company. So I would say, you know, I think it may feel for you guys that you're not going to get enough responses. But I would say, you know, probably think about how DOD and DOJ does it, where they only do it for like 1 week or 2 weeks for a specific category just to see what's going to respond. And I think that if you guys maybe give that a try, you will probably see more responses for that specific category. And it can maybe encourage the large businesses to partner with us more.
So great session, and thank you all again for being here. So I have a comment first, and I'll pivot to a question related to that. So on the recommendation for more detailed information on the evaluation criteria, being more specific about what constitutes excellent or outstanding, I suspect that some of the hesitation for providing that level of detail is there's two drivers to that. One is an issue of fairness, right? Not leading the horse to water in terms of what we're looking for. And because we expect that you're going to understand the industry, understand the requirements, and be able to bring that to us. And then I think the other thing is, I think there's a hesitation. We don't want to set the bar. We don't want to limit the innovation bar. In other words, if we define excellent looks like X, we may have greater innovation that's brought to the table. So I think that may be some of the drivers behind the hesitation to provide that level of detail. So question for you and even to the audience, do you have examples of other agencies that are giving that level of detail, or any of the COs, any of our core community? Have we done that where we feel like we're giving you a greater level of detail in terms of what we're looking for? I think some more clarity around that would be helpful for the discussion and our understanding of how maybe we can meet you in the middle on that recommendation.
I can't recall of a specific one, and I know this is a big challenge across the federal industry. I don't think it's the CMS challenge. But one of the things in that vein, one of the things that we found that was helpful, that was actually released, HHS PSC, the IAAI opportunity, intelligence, automation, artificial intelligence. What they did in their response is that they required the prime contractors to have a minimum of 3 past performances in that area. And so what that did was that raised the bar to be able to have companies that know that specific type of work, that those are the companies that sort of showed up with their excellent responses. So that was been helpful for us. But you're right, you're definitely right, Melissa, is that it is a challenge for the federal space to be able to point out exactly what's excellent.
And I think you guys take the opportunity, certainly in some of the larger procurements, to set forth minimum qualifications. And that's always helpful to say, okay, well, we do meet these, or that's not going to happen, and we need to either find other partners or move on. So I think understanding to say what's excellent is pretty difficult for anyone to do. Minimum qualifications are definitely very helpful to help get the right competitors engaged.
All right, great, thank you. And I'd love to continue the dialogue with you all on this and our team at CMS to see, again, are there opportunities for us to find somewhere in the middle that maintains the integrity of the process, doesn't hinder innovation. And so would love to continue to work with you to kind of get some concrete examples so that we can share with the broader community. So I know we've got to move on to the next panels. And again, thank you. I don't know if you guys are done or if you're going to keep going.
If we have any more questions, we have a few more minutes left on this panel, I believe.
All right,
if
great.
there are a few more questions at all.
All right.
We have one.
Looking back.
Hi. I'm sorry, I thought we'd have more questions. This is more comment, because I am a person who has to do a lot of reading, and reading a lot of proposals and evaluations, et cetera. And Fred, I was surprised that you talked about the tables being 9-point, because I thought that we had crossed that path many years ago, and everything should be 508 and 504 compliant. So I may have to be in many different situations. I don't always have accessibility to a large screen on my desk that CMS now has for everyone. I may have to pull up my laptop, which is teeny tiny. I may have to print. So I know that CMS requires 508 and 504 compliance. So that includes the colors, no bars where it's blue in the background and white writing, tables, everything should be 12-point. I think it's Times New Roman, there might be one other, but you shouldn't even be asking that question about 9 points. So that's just, but thank you for the information today. It was excellent.
Definitely. And I really appreciate, if you don't mind, Matt, if I respond. I would definitely really appreciate that response. I'm actually a Section 508 trained remediation specialist myself, and as I started my business doing remediation for disabled. So I definitely understand some of the challenges of having a smaller font inside of tables and inside of images. And I also, too, are very familiar with the different types of tools that can be utilized if the font is set properly inside of the tables. So I know there's sometimes some challenges from a Section 508 standpoint where if the table itself is not Section 508 compliant and the font size is not compatible with some of the, whether you're using Dragon Natural Speaking or you're using any of the other disability enhanced tools, can be a challenge. So definitely we understand the challenges of having smaller font. And I think within the vendor community, we're always trying to make sure that Section 508 requirements is first and foremost in our responses.
Gina?
Yeah, don't forget.
That is correct. Right, that is correct. Mhm. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you for the
Definitely,
comment, too,
thank
because
you.
I would just say that in Q&As, it does come back that font size changes are allowed, and so that's not a consistent requirement across all procurements currently, so.
Hi, I'm Gina Romano. I'm a contracting officer here. And I have maybe a recommendation. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? When we release the forecast, of course, the CO's name goes on that. And I get calls and I get emails. And I think, it's great to meet with a company, but I find a lot of times it's, here's what we can do. And that's nice to hear, but as a CO, I have to follow a certain process. So one of the things I think would be helpful is when you do reach out, like maybe for a specific procurement, that you provide us some things you're looking for. Like, why are you reaching out to me? Are you looking for, do you have questions? Are there certain items you're trying to identify? Because usually it's just, here's my capability statement, we'd love to meet you. And I don't really, honestly, we're very busy and we don't have a lot of time, so that doesn't always resonate to, hey, I'm going to pick up the phone and call them. But if you reach out and say, hey, we have the following questions, or we want to meet with you because we want to identify this, that, or the other. And sometimes when I do meet with them, I don't have the technical expertise. So you may have some technical questions that I would have to then go back to the program office for. So kind of understanding up front why you want to meet with us would be very helpful.
Thank you for the comment.
Thank you.
And actually, I would agree, and I think that's part of as we wanted to share, is we need to do our homework too, and make sure that we're providing value to the conversations when we come in and understand what the agency needs and what the pain points are. I think we all agree that that's really critical, so that we make the best use of your time. Absolutely.
I think I have two easy questions, I hope. someone said at the beginning that part of the process is FOIAing certain information, putting that request. I was curious, what are you looking for? Because I was wondering if it was stuff like statements of work or different documents that we might be able
Yep.
just to provide without
That's
going through
it.
the FOIA
Yeah.
process?
It's a former statement of work.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
that is so valuable to us because we may see an opportunity and look in all the resources we can find, but not have the statement of work so we can really understand the work.
Because if
Gotcha.
it goes down a GSA route or an IDIQ route, those are usually not publicly out there in one of the repositories we would use to look at.
Okay, so we could be helpful if we were providing statements of work or current statements of work as early on as the process.
Oh, yes.
And that might also
Absolutely.
reduce some of the FOIA requests.
Yeah, we
Yes.
would be very excited about that. Yeah.
I can stand, no, I'm just kidding. But, okay. The other question I had, is it a fair assumption when a draft RFP hits the street that you begin working immediately on it?
Yes.
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 Perfect. 2 easy questions, thank you all.
Yeah.
Good morning. I'm Juanita Wilson, the Group Director of the Medicare Support Contracts Group in OHEM. And I was just curious, can you share any insight surrounding how industry goes about assessing which streamlined vehicles you are part of, such as OASIS or Alliant or federal supply schedules?
Sure.
Cindy, you want to
I mean, I can start, and we truly, if it applies to the business we do, we want to be on as many vehicles as possible, and especially if they are used by an agency that we want to do business with. So we're looking at what vehicles, if we're working with CMS, are you procuring business under? So we do that analysis, and if it's something that we can be competitive and we feel like we can get on, we will absolutely do that. And, I mean, that's kind of a start. Any other?
Yeah, I would add, at LMI, we procured Oasis about 2 years ago. We purchased it through an acquisition, and it's been more successful in other parts of our business because we haven't seen CMS use it a whole lot for procurements. We've seen it basically out of CPI, I think, has used it a couple times for a few procurements. But we would encourage CMS to use those types of vehicles more and more because they are, cross-agency vehicles that more vendors, I think, would have, I think it was Tom's point, that other vendors, and there are CMS vendors that are on those vehicles as well, that have the capabilities that they're already offering to CMS on those vehicles. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Oasis has a lower fee as well than the GSA schedule, so there are benefits to OAGM to using that vehicle as well, so.
Yeah, I think that's where the vicious cycle somewhat starts, because I think we would use them more often if more of our vendors were part of those, so.
LMI's
Thanks.
on Oasis.
That's another plug.
Sorry, we're not supposed to sell, I'm
Cut their
sorry.
mics off.
I know also too, CMS is moving, I think the federal government, best-in-class vehicles. Another vehicle Vets 2 is one of the best in class. I think that's could be an opportunity for CMS to be able to get access to more veteran-owned and service-disabled veteran-owned businesses by utilizing Vets 2. Also too, I'd like to point out, Matt, this is a great exchange to be able to see some people. I'm sort of like starstruck. I'm like, Gina, hey, how you doing? I've been talking a long time over email, so definitely I enjoy this probably a little bit more than others. But
Definitely. Any other questions? I think that concludes our time. We're right about on time, so I guess we'll exchange with the next panel then.
perfect.
Thank you.
We taking our positions as the driver.
Hi. My name is Patricia Semino Boyce from iPro and previously from the Innovation Center at CMS. We're very pleased to be here today for the panel on understanding the importance of proposed innovations. This panel will focus on the benefits of solicitations to include industry's ability to provide innovations in its technical approach. Our panelists here today will discuss their experiences using a series of case studies to propose an innovative approach and its resultant impact on government. The approach to our presentation today on this panel is that our panelists will briefly review the technological and non-technological definition of innovation as it's applied for this discussion. They'll then discuss a brief explanation of risk management as it applies to innovation, and then they will each go through their case study examples and then summarize with recommendations from industry to CMS. That will then be followed by questions that we'll invite from the audience. So I'd like to start now with introductions of our panelists. Mandeep Singh is the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Technology Officer of a Square Group. Naveen Benbar is the Chief Technology Officer of CollaboraLink. Paul O'Donnell is the Senior Vice President of Noridian, and Nancy McCall is a Senior Fellow of Mathematica. So we'll start right now with a brief introduction on the definition of innovation. Paul?
Yeah, thank you. And it was nice to hear the word innovation get worked into some of the final questions. So I think that was a planted segue. So let's move ahead. And we said we'd be brief, and we kept looking at this and the word innovation, and you can go through derivations and all kinds of things, but we ended up with a rather elaborate kind of graphic here to be very brief on it. And really at the end is to say, what can we do that's new that's going to add value? And we want to be as broad as possible in the notion that as we look at this to say, and as we look at that simple idea but very difficult to implement, challenges for us, what kind of challenges we face in bringing innovation into contracts and into bids, and certainly challenges for you to how do you evaluate them and how do you come up with the right approach to them. And in the end, have suggestions and largely say, how can we create an environment? So how can we create a culture where we want to bring innovations, you want to have them, and how can we do a better job of bringing them in? So big picture, we know it's not just technology, and I think that's the one thing we wanted to, at least at the start, say, let's just not let our brain do that and say innovation is new technology. Again, it's much broader than that, and we want to be able to emphasize that. So on that note, Nancy was going to elaborate?
Thanks, Paul. And so I work in the professional services world, in particular CMMI evaluation, and I want to be able to stress the fact that when we think about innovation, and we would encourage you to think about innovation, to think broader than technology or a particular IT tool or solution, and to think more broadly about how innovation can apply in professional services. So for example, in the world that I live in evaluations, we often are trying to push the edge of the envelope and identifying novel ways that we can do primary data collection of qualitative information. So for example, we have here exemplar case studies. It probably is pretty meaningless to most of you in the room, but what we've done is really turn the collection of primary data on its head. And instead of kind of going out and talking to a bunch of practices or beneficiaries, we really look for performance first and back into the way that we're identifying and collecting qualitative information to provide more action-driven information to CMMI. We also invest a lot of resources at Mathematica, as other firms do, in trying to develop new approaches to estimating the impacts of the new models that CMMI is testing. For example, Bayesian analysis is a technique that's been applied in other areas that we now routinely apply to CMMI evaluations. But we're also trying to find new innovative approaches to to estimating impacts across broad swaths of innovative models. For example, the Healthcare Innovation Awards, the first set and the second set, over 50 different model tests happening in the same time. How do we develop innovative approaches to looking across all of that and coming up with information that's actionable to CMMI? So as we go through the examples today, I really would encourage you to think very broadly about innovation and how you can encourage innovation not only on the technology side, but also on the professional services side.
Thank you, Nancy. Now Mandeep will present some issues around risk management for innovation.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about the risk management because with the innovation comes risk. And I think whenever we are looking at the innovation, we all have to really consider risk as one of the key factors. And when we look at risk, there's a whole risk management strategy which we have to start thinking of. Because whenever we are really trying to put up a requirement together from an acquisition perspective, if you are considering innovation, and innovation, like we defined earlier, is more than technology, it could be a benefit, or it could be how your overall process is changing. It could be a simple one task area which is changing, and what is the risk associated with it. And along with the risk comes change management pieces that is going to probably also come associated with that. So all those factors is going to probably play a role into that thing. And when it is using technology, even for data collection purposes, from that perspective, there are other factors that has to come into play. So, some of the things we have to consider is that, is CMS ready for, if it's a technology or a tool or something like that, what is your risk acceptance criteria? Are you ready for a cutting edge tool from the Silicon Valley in that specific, acquisition? If you are, it'll just help the industry kind of be aware what is your risk acceptance criteria from that perspective is. So the industry can, introduce a similar kind of a solution to you from that perspective.
Thank you. Navin, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I would add into that, right, is what is the scope of your risk, right? It has to be a really big question that we ask ourselves, right? Modular contracting, making things smaller, will allow you to actually take more risks because what is at risk, right, is smaller in scope, smaller in dollars, smaller in time, right? So you can make some discoveries, right? Maybe that cutting edge AI solution, that totally new way of doing medical work, right, is something to do at trial, do in smaller batches first to make an understanding of whether it's something that you actually want to expend essentially failure on, right? Because with risk comes failure, right? That is a big part of going to be innovative. You will have things that don't succeed. So the question is, how big do you not want to succeed? And generally, you want that to be as small as possible, but a learning effort throughout, right? So it's actually not a bad word to actually fail if you learn from it and if you scope appropriately within the contracting space that you've got.
Thank you. Now we'll start our description of the case study example, starting with Nancy.
Okay, thanks, Patty. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about an experience I had many years ago. It was actually while CMS was still HICFA, and it's related to the need that CMS had at the time for some innovative primary data collection and methodological approaches to updating the Medicare physician fee schedule. And some of the challenges that I faced in responding to that scope of work that is typical when we think about innovation. First is page limit of proposals. Now, I am not in favor of a 100-page proposal. You're not in favor of reading them. I'm not in favor of writing them. But when we talk about innovative approaches, page limits really are a challenge because you don't have the luxury of multiple pages to explain an innovative approach with all the other requirements that are often built into the RFPs. And we don't want to have to send the review panel to the library to read all these references to explain what we really would like to tell them about an innovative approach. Another challenge is a tendency of when a contract is going straight to award without negotiations, there is no opportunity for discussion to allow the review panel to ask us questions about our approach or us to provide greater level of detail to help in the scoring process. And third, fixed price contracts really stymie innovation. Okay, CPFF, that's my favorite, you guys. That's really something like that is necessary to be able to reduce the risk of proposing innovative solutions. So what was the solution that was proposed on the part of CMS, realizing that they were going to have some, hopefully, and what they needed, some novel approaches as well as some new innovative approaches to this project, is that there was an oral presentation that was part of the solicitation. And so initially we had to provide a very thin proposal and then provide a PowerPoint presentation, and there was a 2-hour oral presentation that allowed for discussion of the technical approach. So why did it work from my perspective, the industry perspective, is that it gave me actually an opportunity to better understand CMS's needs. Oftentimes we see in the RFP what we think are needs, but they end up being wants. And then once after award, you begin to really understand what the problem is, what the risk tolerance is, what the concerns are. You very quickly realize that there may be some different needs that have emerged, or that you have solutions for those needs that move you in a somewhat different direction. It also allowed us to have a far more detailed discussion of the technical approach, but for us to understand CMS's risk tolerance, what they viewed as risks, and for CMS to understand what we viewed as risk from a contracting perspective. And then we were able to discuss the budget trade-offs. Whenever you're talking about something innovative, there are going to be some trade-offs. We are really good at estimating the same old, but it's really difficult sometimes to estimate something that's truly innovative. And so if there is a high risk and it's going to come with a high price, I'd like to know that CMS does not have a risk tolerance for that. And in oral negotiations, you often can understand that, and you can then modify your approach to reduce the risk that CMS perceives to itself. And the other thing is you can use visual aids to really describe the innovative approach. 12-point font, 16, you can go up to 24 in a PowerPoint easily. It's so it really gives you the opportunity to be innovative in your approach to the problem. So what did come out of this process of an initial streamlined proposal, oral presentation? So then we were asked to submit just a revised streamlined proposal as well as a budget that reflected our best understanding of CMS's needs, CMS's risk tolerance, as well as reflected what our risk tolerance would be for producing innovation. We were able to propose some pilot tasks to address both our concern and CMS's concern around some areas that were very risky. It kind of embraces the concept of fail quickly with pilot tasks. We were able to structure it so we would know very soon if a particular approach to primary data collection or analysis was going to pan out or not. And so it really did, at the end of the day, minimize both CMS's and our risk. And so the recommendation coming out of here would be to encourage you to think more about oral presentations and the ability to have discussion between industry and CMS to foster innovation, because innovation comes with risk. And when you're sitting our side of the table, it's very hard sometimes to sell innovation to those that are reviewing proposals higher up in our management, because they see risk. And if they know that there's going to be an opportunity to really discuss it and to understand the risk tolerance for both sides, you'll get far more innovative approaches.
Thank you, Nancy. Paul?
Yeah, thanks. And as I said earlier, I wanted to focus on a process more than a technology. In my example, it's from a few years ago. We're working our way up. It's not quite HICFA time, so you've changed and CMS. But this has to do with the appeals process. So our main work is MAC work. We have 2 AB MACs, 2 DME MACs. So that's just kind of more our culture. And in that world, there's an appeal process where we take the first level of appeals, and the quick does the second level of appeals, and eventually goes to the administrative law judge. And historically, we're making decisions based on our policies and rules, and the quick is as well. And the administrative law judge is not as bound, right? So that person can make those decisions. At the time, it's a judge and the appellant. End of story. And what we were finding is that all of these decisions that we were making and the quick was upholding were getting overturned because they were hearing from our standpoint, they were hearing one side of the story. So whether it was a motorized wheelchair supplier or a physician or whatever the case is. So we decided to say, well, what if we just became a party to the appeal just so we can call in and have our medical director explain to the judge, saying, I just want to explain to you what this policy is. The decision is yours, but you ought to understand Medicare law and you ought to understand why this local coverage decision was made. And by doing that, making that one change, suddenly those percentages completely flipped. So judges who were 75% of the time agreeing with the appellant, 25% of the time afterwards were. And hopefully it was still due process. I mean, it all still due process, but it's more of a sense of let's get the whole story. So that was the innovation I wanted to bring up. And I think there's a couple of lessons on it. One is sometimes innovation is a process or an expertise or a level that a contractor can bring to a situation that can improve the outcome overall. But one of the bigger point I'm trying to make is how can we use what we have? So we already had these contracts to do this work. It's already part of the scope in general for us to do appeals and for us to develop policy. So it's still within, it's not a new authority, a new work that we're doing, but how do we leverage what we already have into something a little bit more? And in current work, you have much more flexibility and ability to do that. To propose something like this would be much more difficult. So if you look at the same scenario, and if we just come at it cold and say, within an RFP response kind of a scenario, we say, here's what we'll do, a year from now, 2 years from now, we'll start being a party to this, and we have reason to think, and our assumption is that things will change, and we'll change the law judge's decision pattern. Us making that statement, you looking at this and evaluating it, saying, maybe, based on what? It's an interesting idea, but it's hard to give it much credence or credit, and we understand that. So, and part of it, the other challenge, a couple other challenges with that is, in the RFP response process, there's always a worry whether we're being compliant with the statement of work or not. Are we allowed to do certain things? And when I say that there's a worry, I would say sometimes there's a paranoia. Are we outside of the scope of what we're even allowed to do? We don't want to be non-compliant. At the end of the day, we don't want to be non-responsive, non-compliant. So even though we know we need to be innovative, there still is that kind of mindset a little bit saying, are we even allowed to do that? That might be, I don't want to trigger this, and someone reads this and says, well, you can't, that's not part of what you're allowed to do. So it helps, and the point I'm making bigger picture is to use the current contracts, and things like MAC contracts are very broad, and some contracts are obviously much more specific, and I know we all have to worry about scope creep and what's in the statement of work, understood, but most of the time there is some flexibility, there is some level of looking at those statements of work and saying, within that, we could do things differently, and I would encourage us, because it does take some work, right? It does take someone looking at this and having the conversations and being able to work from program to OAGM to understand how could we do this, and specifically if there's a cost impact, if there's not, but to work through those things with what we have is the point I was making. We do have some vehicles, and I think longer term, then like for ourselves, then you can start working these into a RFP response, and it's a believable situation saying we have done this for a year, and here's what's happened. And so I think we just want to emphasize to use kind of the vehicles we have right now to bring innovation in.
Thank you, Paul. Mandeep?
Sure. So I'm going to talk about my case study a little bit out of the CMS. We are a new entrant into the CMS space. So I'll share a case study. We do a lot of work with Veterans Affairs, and the case study I'm sharing over here is NIH. So this is a case study where when the government really had a challenge, they issued a market survey. We responded to the market survey, and then we were invited in. And when we were invited in, basically we discussed and talked about and contributed. And after that, the government issued a statement of objectives, which was a short statement of objectives, but the challenge the government had, they did not know what is the best way to really achieve that challenge. The challenge was that they wanted to do a data collection of the evidence base to form up a new evidence-based diagnosis for DMDD. And they wanted to collect the data from the patients, but how do you collect the evidence from the minors who are children between the age groups of 8 to 18? So they gave us a challenge. We went in, we described a potential solution for them using technology. We have a clinical arm where we run our own clinics, so we brought in clinicians and our researchers, and we all collectively said, this is a potential solution that could work for you. And that is how we really addressed the challenge, where we used a gaming platform where the children are playing games and using an artificial intelligence tools, we are collecting the data as they are playing games, and obstructions are coming in front of them as if their heart rate goes above a certain area, a certain range, or if their blood pressure is out of the certain range. So that is the data we wanted to see. How can they use their brain power, manage their anxiety level to bring their heart rate control from that perspective? So that's the challenge. So what did we do? We kind of used technology. We changed the status quo and really came up with an innovative solution to really kind of achieve the goal. And from a contracting perspective, from an acquisition perspective, they issued us a statement of objectives, which we responded, and they kind of organized that whole contract as a modular contracting. So we were initially kind of given a contract for a proof of concept, and then which was a time and material basis, and then from there was other parts which were a firm fixed price component. So it became a hybrid contract, but it was modular as we progressed along. It really kind of added value to the client, to what they needed, and the final business goal was achieved from that perspective.
Thank you, Mandeep. Naveen?
All right. So I'm just going to start with, weirdly, don't innovate, right? Which seems like a strange thing to say, especially after all these great case studies over here. But what I really mean by that, right, is just to call out for, hey, let's go innovate, without a real strong understanding of the end objective is actually going to drive to probably bad results on all sides, right? So my case study is actually, so I actually am only recently a contractor. I fairly recently shifted over from being a Fed at the GSA. And so, my case study is actually from when I was the director on the IT for a program called the Integrated Award Environment, which was actually kind of referenced earlier today when people talked about FPDS, right? It's FPDS, it's SAM, it's FBO, it's all those things. So what we really ended up doing there, so we had, I came in after an initial troubled launch of SAM.gov and was there to help right the ship to a certain degree, right? And so what we really learned out of that, right, in terms of the direction that we were going, right, is, well, what we think we want from innovation, right, is the newest, the shiniest thing, right, especially if we're talking about technology innovation, which is, obviously where I'm coming from in my head, right? And we think that that's going to be the most important thing, then that's going to be what actually solves our problems. When in fact, in actuality, right, we focus far too much on the tech of it, right? What we actually need to talk about, right, are the results that we're trying to aim for. Not how we get there, and not the specifics of that approach, right? The further away that we can actually really get from specifying things that we don't know, right? If we actually really don't know how to get to an end result, the more you can avoid specifying the technologies or the baseline or the tools or the approaches to that, the better off we're going to be. Now, that balances out with sort of this core idea that I have, which is, if you do know, be as boring as possible. Right? That's what gets you to an end result. Be as boring as possible in those cases. But the more mission-driven you are, the more times you're actually going to want to say, hey, the more specific to the mission that a particular task is, the more you're going to actually just want to open yourself up to saying, well, this is the end goal, right? I know that very, very strongly. So most of the time, right, there has to come with this sort of that, with that objective and understanding of what the end user is and the end user needs, right? Whoever that end user is, right? And that could be a patient, that could be somebody who's trying to submit claims, that could be any number of these things, but really understanding what that looks like to drive those objectives becomes very key. And this is where those early, non-fixed price things like discovery sprints and, approaches where you're actually doing some experimentation that are open-ended, right? That are likely actually to not completely succeed, but from which you're going to learn a lot, become extremely valuable small bets to make. To allow you to get to an understanding of, okay, this is actually how we can get there. This is actually how we can execute in partnership with, across industry and the federal space. So, what we're really trying to avoid is these last results here, right? Just something completely unusable because nobody's talked to the people who are going to actually be most affected by the result that you're putting out into the world. And you haven't experimented. You haven't tried out anything with them, with those users, and put yourself out there to say, well, let's go try this thing in this small way and figure out if it actually could possibly succeed at all. And so we can avoid sort of gold plating things. We can avoid picking the wrong direction and then sticking to it because that's because we've put a large bet on something, so we feel committed to it. And really just going out there and saying, let's break this up into smaller chunks, eventually getting to potentially hybridized, firm fixed price specified solutions because we've done the experimentation in more flexible ways up front. We've done discovery, we've done our failure in small ways. And so that's something that was interesting to learn. And I think one of the things I would say, right, that was very hard from my perspective is coming to the point where we actually did understand those objectives. Because that takes work. That takes a lot of effort to understand what the end result needs to be, what metrics need to change, how you actually know if the world has actually moved. And really sort of leveraging any combination of RFIs, small experimental proofs of concepts before you get to the point where you're building out the larger system or larger capability is important.
Thank you, Naveen. Now we'd like to have each of the panelists review recommendations from industry to CMS. Paul?
We'll start at the bottom, actually, from the listing. It's using what we have and as looking forward to it. So again, as you're trying to put together a response or proposal, by the time this is done, it's evaluated, the work is done, it could be years in advance. So to know, to be writing, saying, here's what our innovation will be 3 years from now, 4 years from now, kind of build it so that by the nature of it, it's open to innovation. So an emerging technologies provision is one way within the contract itself. But it's bigger picture, it's just increasing the flexibility on the contracts themselves is the main point that I wanted to stress on that final bullet is use what we have and be open, as Naveen was saying, not everything being huge, but having small testing and innovations within current contracts to keep the cycle rolling on that.
Nancy?
Okay, working up. I'd like to address the bullet with respect to capitalizing on improving communication, which really builds upon my case study. In terms of the recommendation about oral presentations to allow, in addition to written proposals or in lieu of, as well as considering sponsoring innovation forums that would allow firms to engage in discussions about innovation with decision makers. And I want to just elaborate on that point for a moment. We often will spend time trying to educate like CMMI evaluation staff on new methods that we're exploring or new innovative approaches that we're taking, but we may be talking to 2 or 3 people, or maybe within a particular project and maybe only a handful of people get to know about this innovative approach. And then we think about using it in a new proposal and we don't know who's going to be on the review panel. We don't know if it's the same people we've spoken to, the people who are familiar with it. Or are we going to just get blank stares, staring back at our proposal because they haven't had any exposure? So some way that you can enhance communication between the technical staff and industry to allow for a broader discussion before solicitation would also be really, really helpful. And I just want to put in a plug for, I think, an excellent example that you have already implemented that really does build on many of these recommendations that are on this slide, and that has to do with the artificial intelligence health outcomes initiative that you just have recently launched. It is fantastic because it's staged. It has oral presentations. It allows for innovation because it's not prescriptive, but it really does allow for proof of concept as you advance along the stages with feedback. It minimizes risks to companies because we can fail quickly if we're not doing well, according to your perspective. Or if we continue to build, it gives us some confidence that the resources we'll be investing are really going to potentially pay off. I think right now, probably what's happening out in industry, there's a lot of scurrying on to say, okay, we're going to win maybe over $1 million, but how much is this going to take us to invest in that to win it? And what's the likelihood of winning? Less than 5%, less than 1%, 10%. So I think that this is an excellent example that I would encourage you to continue thinking along those concepts.
Thank you, Mandeep.
So again, working the way up over here, I'm going to talk about my primary recommendation is that CMS to establish an innovation lab. And what that allows is, to test the innovations at a smaller scale and help you to manage the risk. And if you can fail in the innovation lab, you don't have to touch or implement that into your production environments. Even it's a process, it could be whatever, but you can really start testing certain scenarios in your innovation lab. And once the innovation passes through the innovation lab and now you want to roll it into a larger scale, consider modular contracting because you are still learning as the way you are going into that new innovation scenarios.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Naveen?
All right, continuing the trend. So let's talk about incrementalism versus iteration, right? So I think one of the key things about being successful in terms of bringing new things into the environment and succeeding along the way is actually being thoughtful about iteration and not incrementalism. And what I mean by that is iteration means that every single time you go through these short cycles of turnaround, you have something new, complete, and deliverable to somebody in the end user space, right? Incrementalism could be building up layer by layer, but you don't get something working until all the layers are in place. It's something that becomes really important because, there's this saying that I actually fairly strongly disagree with, right? Which is move fast and break things. Well, that's wrong, right? That's actually broadly wrong. We've seen the results of that from the very company that started saying that out in the world, right? But what we should be moving fast, right? But we should be building things, right? So what that means is, can we scope down so that the cycles are fast, which means that our feedback loops are fast as well. But each cycle is complete in its own way. It goes into the world and actually does something to our environment, and it can grow into the appropriate scopes that you need for those larger programs to be successful. Building this into contracts, it does mean things like modular contracting. It does mean things like allowing for proofs of concepts and pilots through the contracting components themselves, so that you can actually build those iterations one after another. So being thoughtful about that, I think, is something where the outcomes of that can be just something, be in a place where you're solving those problems, but in a totally different space than you thought you might be from the outset.
Thank you. Now we'd like to open it up to the audience for any questions to our panelists.
Looks like we did very well.
Yeah. I think it was the Simpsons graphic. I think that's what worked.
Hello, I'm Jaime Galvez. I do have a question in reference to, you were talking about the innovation lab or something to that effect. How do you feel about a challenge during the RFP process as part of the evaluation criteria? Question one. Question two is in reference to, you were talking about iteration and sprints. What would you recommend as a more specific evaluation criteria for Agile?
Go ahead.
So in terms of innovation lab, this is, I guess, that comes into play as part of your market research, market survey process. So you are really trying to see, as part of your market survey, a solution. You can bring it into your innovation lab and test that solution at that stage. And once you have determined that that solution will work in your environment, you could take that solution to the next level. Okay. You want to talk about the iteration?
Yeah. In terms of Agile, right, one of the things that at least I found, in a number of contexts, right, is just going to say, hey, do you have an Agile process, right? We'll get you back, yes, we use Scrum, right? But that doesn't actually tell you much about the actual ability to do Agile work. There actually has to be a focus on what has been largely referred to as small a Agile instead of large a Agile, right? So large a Agile is like the branded, like, hey, we're going to talk about scaled Agile, we're going to talk about Scrum, we're going to talk about Kanban. Small a Agile is what's going to get you results, right? Small a Agile means that how do you react to change? How do you deliver complete products in small chunks? And what are the processes and approaches that you bring to those conversations, right? So asking about, how does one decompose a problem into smaller problems? How does one decompose a problem into those iterations so that you can be successful in the delivery becomes more important than do you have a Scrum Master, right? It's not to say that that isn't an important thing. You should, right, if you're using Scrum. But in terms of actually understanding the value of that, there's a different approach to that. And you mentioned challenges, which I actually am generally a fan of as well, right? It should show you that the organization that you're challenged with can actually do an iteration, right? There's an expectation that you're coming out with something complete within a very short amount of time. I think that the balance, though, is for us, is understanding what that technology space might look like, so we understand the rules of that challenge up front with enough warning to know, should we even be in that space, right? Or can we be successful? What do we need to do to adjust? Who do we need to partner with, right? Becomes very important. So knowing that as early as possible, sort of echoing some of the conversations of the prior panel, becomes really important, especially if challenges are going to be up front, right? And I would actually want to add one other thing to that is, what's the focus of it, right? Is it going to be a focus on the technology, or is it going to be a focus on design? Like, what are those things that come into play so we know what's important to you and can be the most successful in that space?
Well, yeah, one other consideration, you're mentioning innovation from an evaluation standpoint. It is difficult. So again, it's not like, here's the answer. But one of the things I think to consider is in some ways, is innovation more a reflection of past performance than it is to say, trust us, we'll do something for you in the future. So I would just say, from an evaluation standpoint, it may be something that you look at as past performance, not just in a compliance standpoint, here's what your scores were, here's what you have, but it may be useful to see from a proposal and an evaluation, what have you done from an innovative standpoint in the past? What is your culture and what can you do for us? Might be some ways it was, I don't know, easier to evaluate, or you have something more substantial to work with than a promise of a future change. So to me, it's just one consideration.
Nancy, did you have anything? Any other questions?
Yeah, I would like to know if I get the slides, especially for this presentation, because I didn't have a chance to look at all those diagrams. And I have some real questions about the NIH challenge, since we're doing that.
Absolutely.
AI challenge, and our innovation center is doing that. I'd like to learn a little more. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Wherever they are, I don't know, but even the other slides too, from the last, this one specifically.
And I could talk offline after that if you have a specific question. Yeah, absolutely.
So your last recommendation on that prior slide was about an emerging technologies provision in the contract. Have you seen a successful use of that somewhere in the government, and could you share how that actually works?
There's been, GSA has put out a number of these sort of emerging tech kind of challenges. What we've seen in partnership, or what GSA had seen in partnership with that, right, is really good conversations that came out of that and they were actually largely like sort of these bilateral conversations that led to the emerging tech provisions in contracts going forward. So those larger industry sort of gatherings that brought together folks who are going to talk about machine learning and AI and all of these other things, that allowed then for us to know the space, to put in emerging tech clauses that allowed for at least areas in the contracts that basically did not prescriptively specify the end result. So we did see some successful, for example, blockchain capabilities out of the Federal Acquisition Service internally, and other sort of machine learning capabilities that folks within that agency had done for building out, if I recall correctly, some of the spaces in the what was it called? There were behavioral sciences spaces actually within the Office of Government Policy and some of those other support functions that had actually used some of those environments. And I do know that that DHS, I believe it was DHS, had done some similar things with large data and machine learning capabilities in their OIG organization, actually, where they basically had opened themselves up to sort of larger scopes around basically an unspecified technology solution that allowed them to actually fight fraud more proactively in spaces. So that.
So if I may add to that, I guess, the term emerging technology is used very loosely sometimes. And I think, we got to probably just think about that, how does it benefit the business? There are a lot of buzzwords flying around from AI, blockchain to whatever. At the end of the day, sometimes it could be a very simple, small innovation, which could probably do the same thing, but at a lower cost. And if you can reduce a cost, that's a benefit to a business, and that is an innovation. And a couple of years ago, we implemented a knowledge management system for Department of Veterans Affairs, and the only key component, use emerging technology, use innovation, use whatever, but how can you bring the cost down? And that is how we did that, and not only that, I know we also got the Federal Health IT Award on that thing, right? So sometimes innovation is you don't have to really go get that shiny, jazzy object, but just meet the business goal. And the business goal at this moment, it could be that if you are spending $100 million, how can I bring it down to $20 million? If that is a savings you can bring to the table, that could be an innovation.
Yeah, can I play off that for just one second too, right? And that's actually the point there I would add into, right, is that's when we talked about objectives, right? It was more important to use to reduce reduce the cost than to drive to new technology. Like I'll be honest, right? I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of just throwing out emerging technology. Like I'm actually like a more blockchain skeptic than most of the technologists in my space, and for example, and so I think just saying emerging technology doesn't drive us necessarily to outcomes. So.
Yeah, and just from of an evaluation perspective, I can view the emerging technology provision. I know this is going to upset Carol, so close your ears, Carol. Sometimes there are ad hoc tasks built into evaluations, and some cores make very good use of those, that ad hoc task, and some cores do not. But we have examples, for example, in one of our current projects, where we are using ad hoc tasks to try to innovate how we're analyzing qualitative data by using machine learning techniques. Currently, when we do key informant interviews or site visits, we collect oodles and oodles of information and data. And then we go through a very laborious process to code that data, to try to pull out themes. And so what we've done through an ad hoc task was to really evaluate the utility and the value to CMS of using a machine learning technique. And it is definitely showing value. It is far more streamlined and efficient process, which will translate into lower costs in the future. So I'm a fan of ad hoc tasks. Sorry, Carol.
Yes, next question.
Okay, so I think I've got a comment and/or a recommendation and then a question. So, we're asking for industry to bring us innovative solutions that we undergo through the source selection process. And yet sometimes I think we perceive that innovation as too risky to implement, in support of our programs. And so to the extent that you're not already doing this, I would encourage you to make it explicitly clear for us to help us understand how might we manage and mitigate the risk to the program associated, with the introduction of that innovation. So I think that's a common thing that happens is we ask for it on one hand, but then we think it's too risky to implement. And so if you can help make that more clear to us in terms of how do we manage and mitigate that risk, we may see an increase in adoption of some of that innovation. The second thing I wanted to ask is, or pose a question about is, you're talking about iteration, not just incrementalism, but how would you rate CMS's capability, how ready are we to adopt these kind of practices? What is it going to take on our side? Again, we're asking you to bring that to the table, and I can tell you firsthand through the COM implementation that we're supporting across the agency, it's been quite a learning experience for me, and I did not realize myself personally the commitment that I need to put to this. And so I'm asking the question, what is your observation relative to what you're seeing across other agencies? What do we need to do to improve our readiness to be successful in this space? Because it does take, and I think, an even tighter integrated team with the contractor to ensure that we're successful in this space.
Yeah, so I think that CMS is, so COM, I'm familiar with. I'm actually relatively new to the CMS space, right? But what I've seen is definitely a willingness to move in this direction. Relative to other agencies, I would say, I mean, this is actually a not easy thing for most federal agencies. And I think a big part of that is there's a compliance-driven sort of component to, especially, again, I'm speaking from a very technological space, and that's not the only space and that's not the only perspective, but I'll speak from it and hopefully other folks will have other perspectives. But because there is a very heavy compliance-driven component to delivering technology, what we end up doing, that is actually sort of the largest hill to sort of push ourselves up, right? How do we deliver something into production space to users when there's lots of compliance around that maybe prevents that from happening as frequently as it could, number one. And number two, I think the other thing, and I think you nailed it in saying, right, there's a lot of effort from the federal and industry partnership side to really understand what, for example, product ownership looks like, right? To think in products is something very different than thinking in projects. And it actually goes exactly to that incrementalism versus iterative thing, right? If you're thinking in products, you're thinking iterations. If you're thinking in projects, you're generally thinking increments. And so I think the big shift that we've seen through CMS and in a number of programs, right, is people starting to understand what that product ownership looks like. And there's still a gap there, but I would say that gap exists in almost all agencies right now, right? So, empower your product owners is a big one, right? So people can make decisions as far from the edges as possible, or as close to the edges as possible, rather, as far from the center as possible. And work on process. What's the optimal process that gets something in front of actual end users, right? And smoothing that is sort of, those are the two big hurdles, two non-trivial hurdles, right? That doesn't change overnight.
Right.
But.
Well, I think I can say from firsthand experience, like, we're struggling with how do we make sure we're staying out of the way of the product development and delivery teams, but at the same time, strategically communicating to stakeholders around what to expect and by when. And so we're in the early phases of the COM implementation, and we're trying to marry all of that up, but it's much easier said than done.
Absolutely.
And making sure that team, meets all of the compliance requirements and continues to build out that capability. But then we also have to manage the change management piece and the strategic communications piece around all of the activity that's happening.
Yeah.
And real quick, what we find, I think, is there's increasingly an openness to innovation within CMS, is our experience, saying that people are interested, right? You don't get a ton of saying, stop. I think the reality piece, though, is to say, if we look at a day-to-day, say, but there is enough to do within your statement of work, there's enough to do within your performance requirements, it's like, it's on top of things, right? So it ends up being more. One thing that I think has been good in our space is, we do cost plus award fee, and having innovation as part of the award fee is at least a tool, right? And using that tool and incenting us to say to be looking. And what it does, I think it helps on your side as well to say, that's why we're pushing these things. You've incented us to do this, and I think having that does help to say, to have some reason besides it's the right thing to do, work with us on this. Because I think otherwise the scope itself is enough for all of us. So I think that's a challenge very often.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, the next panel is on the value of quality debriefing, and please thank me in joining, thanking our
Thank you, everybody.
panelists. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Good morning, folks. My name is Mike Finkel. I'm CEO of Sparksoft Corporation, small business. We do business with CMS as well as some other agencies. We're going to be doing something a little bit different than the panel. We're actually going to go through a mock debriefing and then provide some feedback at the end of what we think are recommendations. We thought that was easier to convey the message we were trying to bring by doing that. So we're going to have some actors on stage, and I'll introduce you to them here shortly. So as I said, we're doing the mock debriefing of post-award. We have Mark Yeoman from ICF, Senior Vice President. He'll be portraying the account or sales executive from the company, Healthiest Corporation, that has lost the bid. Representing contracts from Healthiest Corporation, Betsy Burton from CGI Federal. She's a contracts director of the health and compliance programs at CGI Federal. Representing CMS, we have representing the contracting officer at CMS. We have Corey Stevenson from Cognosante, Senior VP and General Manager for Civilian Health IT. And doing the technical representative role, we have Raj Ramesh from CTEC Corporation, Executive Vice President, also a small business. And as I mentioned, I'll be narrating this story here. But before we get into that, I'll give you a little kind of play into where we're going with this so you understand where the story goes. So these are the evaluation standards by which this particular procurement was evaluated. These were the different ratings that were used to do the evaluation process on this view. Oh, too fast there. Okay, so setting the scene. This procurement was a SharePoint technical services procurement. It was a fixed firm price procurement. It was a brand new requirement for CMS. It was a best value procurement effort. The evaluation criteria included technical approach, proposed staff, past performance, and price in descending order of importance. The non-price factors, the technical approach, proposed staff, and past performance, when combined, were considered to be significantly more important than price. Here you see a chart with collapsed ratings for both the winner, Tech R Us, and Healthiest Corp. And as you can see, Healthiest Corp was a little bit lighter on the technical approach. They had good versus outstanding. Their proposed staff was fair versus Tech R Us, who had good. Past performances were both acceptable for both companies. However, Healthiest Corporation did come in with a lower price, and they've now requested a debrief. So in scene one, what we're going to see is Healthiest Corporation receives a letter and notifying them of the award to another offer.
Hi, Mark. I assume you read the CMS letter stating we lost the SharePoint technical services work. Tech R Us was over 27% more expensive than we were. I'd like to know how they decided that difference in scores is worth the extra money.
I can't believe we lost this one. I mean, we had such a great technical approach, and it was rated only good? Seriously? Seriously?
I know.
I mean, it's frustrating. We work so hard and get so little feedback in this letter, The government side doesn't seem to appreciate all the nights and weekends and holidays we put in on these proposals, what a big investment it is for our company. We've got to get a better understanding of what happened here and how to do better going forward.
I agree. It's frustrating. We've learned nothing from the award letter. We need to get more detailed information as allowed by the FAR.
Yeah,
Responding to the solicitation was a big investment on our bid and proposal budget. We spent over 3 weeks, like you said, and tens of thousands of dollars developing our response. The award letter doesn't help us know how to do a better job responding to the next opportunity. Let's request an in-person debriefing to get more details and answers to our questions.
I was really counting on winning this contract. I mean, we've been working in CMS for a while, but this was going to give us a more bigger profile, enterprise-wide visibility. I was counting on it in the pipeline, and now I've got to go explain this to our CEO, and I don't know what to say based on this, and I'm not looking forward to explaining that to her.
So, the first scene began to set some of the issues that companies face. Following the post-award debriefing notification, Healthiest Corporation requested a debriefing and was granted one. Now, let's fast forward to another meeting at Healthiest Corporation as they prepare for their debriefing with the government.
All right, so before we meet with the government, let's cover a few things, make sure I understand everything. So we lost it, we were lower on price. I thought we had a really solid proposal, excellent in my mind. So we've got to make sure we get our questions answered because we did lose on technical.
I agree. We've had a number of these government debriefings lately that have been lacking in detail. Based on the letter we received, we were compliant, but I can't tell how we missed the mark on our approach either. I certainly hope that CMS will not be afraid to openly share feedback. I would really like to understand the specific areas where our technical proposal fell short.
I agree. I mean, we hired an IT architect that knows CMS, and if we can't get enough CMS work, she may be out of a job. And we've really got to get some insight into what they were looking for in our response. And we've got to understand the trade-off they made. I mean, they paid a premium for this award, and they don't usually do that.
Well, we know the government won't be able to share specific details on the other submission, nor can they speculate much on what we could have done better. I would at least like to better understand the specifics in our technical approach that were inadequate or scored low. It will be tricky, but let's see if we can ask enough probing questions to understand where we came up short. I have a list of the questions we pulled together, but let's be on our toes for opportunities to delve deeper if they give us an opening. Should we remind them that the FAR allows for more information sharing?
Why not? I mean, there's only so many proposals we can write. Every one is an investment for our company, and so if we can't learn more about what CMS wants, we've got to go back to bidding at DHS or DOD instead.
So at this point, Healthiest Corporation is ready to pepper CMS with a bunch of questions when they come in. But how will CMS answer those questions? As a leading practice, the key members of the government debriefing team are meeting in advance before the meeting with Healthiest to discuss their approach to the debriefing.
Hey, Raj. I'm so glad that you had an opportunity to prep for the debrief tomorrow on Healthiest Corp. I know you're busy, I am too, and you really want to kick off this project, but taking time to give Healthiest feedback will really build their confidence in our source selection decision. We're going to follow FAR 15.506, post-award debriefing procedures, and what will happen in that meeting is I'll cover the source selection solicitation overview. I'll provide an overall evaluated price and technical rating of both TechRS, the winner, and Healthiest Corp, as well as past performance information on Healthiest. We didn't rank them, so we won't have to cover any of that. Then I'll turn to you. I'll have you cover the evaluation of significant weaknesses and deficiencies in their proposal. Following up with that, I'll summarize our rationale for award, and finally, we'll take any questions that they may have. Are you okay with that agenda?
Not so much about the agenda, but is this an award that can be protested?
Yeah, I mean, that's the climate we're in right now. Unfortunately, that's where we are. We'll work through the process. What's in our favor is your team did a great job documenting the strengths and weaknesses of the two proposals, and I feel we did a great job overall documenting the best value trade-off decision that we made. Overall, I'm very comfortable with our decision, and I'm ready to have this meeting. Don't be worried about protests, but be mindful. Healthiest did, however, come in with a lower price, so I'm sure they have concerns over why they weren't selected overall. But the goal of the meeting is to really help them improve their future proposals going forward.
Lower cost, yes. but they had some gaps in their proposal. I can provide an explanation on the evaluation of the technical proposal. We'll need to be careful, though. I understand we cannot directly provide details of the TechSource's approach.
You're exactly right. We can't give any details of TechRS's proposal, but we can focus on areas that we saw deficiencies and weaknesses within the healthiest technical approach. I've outlined the agenda. The goal is for us to speak in one voice. We need to propose or speak to the actual comparison of their proposal to the solicitation factors, and then communicate the basis of our source selection decision, including our trade-off analysis, going with TechRS with a higher tech rating and a slightly higher price over the healthiest corporation's slightly lower cost and lower technical rating overall.
In addition to noting their weaknesses, can I also discuss what we liked about their proposal?
Absolutely. This is going to be a difficult meeting for them. So if we can start with the things that we do like, that would be helpful, and then we'll go into the things and discuss the weaknesses against the evaluation factors.
Okay, I'll follow your lead. I do have technical notes on how Healthiest's response measured or didn't measure up against our technical approach evaluation factor. I can also speak to their proposal format that made the proposal difficult to evaluate. They had some crazy graphics in there. Can we share that information?
Ugh, those graphics. Yeah, be as specific as you can about the graphics. It was really a poor showing on their part. The real goal for this is to help them not make the same mistakes on future proposals. So anything you can add in that department will definitely be important. Before we go to the meeting tomorrow, make sure it's been a while, so make sure you go back, look at the source selection documentation, as well as any internal information that we provided on the TEP panel, so we're prepared.
Finally, if we have any contractual questions from the vendor, can I defer them back to you?
Please, stay in your lane, Raj.
Okay.
I'll handle the contract questions, you handle the technical.
Will do.
To share or not to share? That is the question ahead of us. Both parties are prepared to meet. Let us see how all this unfolds during the debriefing.
Hi. So good morning. Thank you for joining us for the post-award debriefing on the SharePoint requirement. Let's start off with just quick introductions. I'm Corey Stevenson. I'm the contract officer.
I'm Raj, the technical representative.
Hi, I'm Mark, Healthiest Account Exec, and the lead for this effort.
I'm Betsy, Director of Contracts.
Sure. So today's agenda is pretty structured. We're going to be in accordance with 15506. I'll give an overview of the solicitation. We'll discuss the evaluated price and technical ratings of the successful offerer and your organization. And then we'll talk about past performance information for your organization specifically. We'll address strengths and weaknesses for each evaluation factor. Then we'll summarize the rationale for our award. And then at that point, we'll open it up for any questions from you. So let's begin with the solicitation itself. The SharePoint Technical Services requirement was a firm fixed price solicitation. The solicitation factors included in descending order of importance started with technical approach, proposed staffing, past performance, and then price. As stated in Section M, the price factors, technical approach, proposed staffing, past performance, when combined, were significantly more important than your overall costs. Also, as stated in Section M, we did a price analysis and to ensure prices were fair and reasonable and appropriate with the level of effort to meet the requirements. In summary, for TechRS, from a technical approach perspective, their technical approach was outstanding, their proposed staffing was good, their past performance was acceptable, and their price was $5,427,340. Your proposal specifically received a good and technical approach, a fair and proposed staffing, an acceptable past performance, and a price of $4,257,056. Do you have any specific questions so far?
Sure. Can you elaborate on the price evaluation?
Sure. Our price suggested that you didn't understand the effort associated with executing the technical proposal that you wrote up, and it created a risk from us from an implementation perspective.
Can you explain the process you used and what components were deemed to be underestimated?
Sure. Raj, our technical representative, will speak to those details.
Sure. Your proposed staffing level was considered low to accomplish what you outlined in your technical approach based on our evaluation. For example, you proposed only 3 FTEs to roll out SharePoint across the entire CMS organization as required by the PWS. We have over 15,000 personnel that will use the SharePoint, and this includes employees, contractors, and volunteers. 3 FTEs would not be able to roll out SharePoint in a reasonable amount of time, which would create significant execution risk.
I don't remember that in the solicitation.
We thought it was pretty clear in the solicitation. More detailed information was available in Amendment 2, Attachment 7, SharePoint Future State Environment.
So we've been told in the past that the FAR only requires that you share weaknesses, but it would be really helpful if we could hear both strengths and weaknesses so we could know kind of what to improve on and as well as what to keep in our proposals.
That's a fair request, and Raj and I will discuss some of the strengths and weaknesses within your non-price factors.
In the technical approach, Healthiest Corporation received a good rating. You had multiple strengths on the proposed SharePoint solution and one significant weakness that resulted in the good rating. For strengths, we like that you proposed using human-centered design to ensure end users were included in the design process. We also like the agile methodology to develop the site. Healthiest Corporation proposed one online training class to teach all of CMS how to use the new SharePoint site. We assigned that part of the solution as significant weakness as it failed to consider the change management efforts that would be needed to ensure that CMS personnel knew of the site and were able to take advantage of the capabilities that will be in the new SharePoint solution. As noted in the PWS background section, CMS is a very federated organization. One online class was insufficient for properly rolling it out.
So that's an example of some good detailed information. Now, the Healthiest Corporation has a sense of where they went wrong in their technical approach. They likely should have known an organization as large and dispersed as CMS would need more than one training class.
So now let's look at the staffing evaluation factor. Healthiest Corporation received a good rating. Healthiest Corporation's organizational matrix is well documented. You detailed the roles and responsibilities of each member of the project team and identified one point of contact for CMS to ensure clear lines of communication between government and contractor staff. The program manager has extensive experience with SharePoint solutions implementations, including handling sensitive data and information. This experience limits schedule delays and risks and can support our mitigation strategies. These were noted as strengths. Now, for the weakness on the staffing evaluation factor, your technical team lead resume identified the required 7 years of implementation experience. However, the experience was with implementation of Crosspoint, SharePoint's sister application. While there are similarities between the two, limited experience with SharePoint could negatively impact implementation and deployment.
So we did find it a bit hard to find people with the exact skills. I mean, were other companies able to find them, or were they also challenged? Because these are hot skills in a very hot labor market, and companies don't have technical staff just sitting around, so you do have to go find them for their proposals. And the RFP has some really specific certifications and qualifications required that we didn't feel were necessary for implementation, but it did make it hard to find staff.
We looked into that. We actually did market research, which indicated companies and individuals meeting the staffing requirements were available. TechRS actually met our staffing requirements. But however, beyond that, I really can't go into any details of their actual proposed staffing.
Well, thank you. Could you cover the past performance evaluation?
Yes. Past performance was the last technical evaluation factor, and you were rated acceptable. We used CPARS reports for the projects that you submitted, and also CPARS reports for other relevant projects in CPARS, in PPIRS. These were all reports that someone in your company has reviewed and approved. All the submitted past performances were determined to be highly relevant. Two past performance references, the HHS contract and the US aid contract, indicated Healthiest Corporation did a great job supporting the software implementation, stating that key personnel were responsive and well qualified, and that the work performed was of the highest quality. For weaknesses, the technical evaluation panel found one of the references on the VA contract indicated that some of the monthly reports were submitted late. This is considered a weakness to CMS, as understanding the progress of the project and the timely submission of reports minimizes potential risks or issues to the successful implementation and deployment of the SharePoint solution across CMS. Another weakness was that this same reference also indicated that turnover was high for the network administration staff, forcing the government to continuously onboard new contractor personnel and get them up to speed. While the network administration staff is not considered key personnel, the constant staff changes could negatively impact the SharePoint solution implementation and deployment schedule.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that feedback. And Betsy, we're going to have to look at the reporting and staffing processes at the VA.
So, we know that Healthiest is calling the VA as soon as they leave this meeting to find out exactly what they did wrong and how do they fix this before it goes too far.
Do you have any questions for us going forward?
I do. Given that the difference between a good and outstanding score is based on the degree to which the bidder's approach exceeds performance or capability standards, how did you make that distinction? That is, what would have elevated our proposal to the next level? Is it more strengths, or did we need to bid more solution features or better staff?
Beyond improving or eliminating the weaknesses that we just identified, I can't speculate on what else might have been included in your proposal. However, innovations within the scope of the requirement and clarity in demonstrating your understanding of specific tasks in the work environment would always add value to your proposal.
Well, thank you. It really does help to get specific examples of where the reviewers thought something needed some more explaining, so we'll take that back into our processes. So on the sections that you felt we didn't respond very positively or strongly to the RFP, what did you want to see? What would have instilled more confidence?
Sure. We're looking for clear examples of solutions and implementation. We're looking for specific demonstrations of successful similar work that adds value and reduces risk to the government. This means specifically explaining in the proposal what you would do to meet our PWS requirements, not just repeating what you saw in the RFP and just telling us that you would do it. This should really explain in some detail what the specific benefits are to CMS in your approach.
So this is always a real challenge for industry when responding for proposals. Companies try to balance the need to address every requirement that's in the RFP and show that they're responsive, but then there's usually isn't enough room to provide the kind of detail that explain all the benefits of their specific approach. Companies try to balance it out between proving proof points and their capabilities and explaining why their offering presents a unique benefit to the government. The lesson for Healthiest is that their balance was wrong, and they need more proof points when they do the next proposal.
Can you explain how and why CMS determined that the TechArc proposal was worth the price premium it proposed? Can you help us understand the trade-off decision in terms of benefits the government would realize in exchange for paying such a premium? I realize you can't disclose the details of the TechArc proposal, but it would be helpful to identify in general terms the benefits you expect to obtain with the winning proposal.
We did make a trade-off decision. As we stated in the RFP, the non-price factors were considered significantly more important than price. We determined that within the TechRS proposal, it would result in a better adoption and less burden on the government for personnel supporting the full rollout of SharePoint to all CMS personnel. This benefit, along with the corresponding lower risk we assessed to the TechRS proposal overall, was deemed to be worth the price premium in relation to your proposal.
Thank you.
So was there anything else about the proposal we could have presented better? What I'm trying to say is we're trying to improve the readability and understandability and your ability to find things in the proposal. Was it clear and easy to evaluate?
There were some things that made your proposal more difficult to read, understand, and evaluate. For example, your page layout used excessive diagrams, captions, and references, various fonts, and tight spacing between paragraphs. While the RFP did not specify a page layout, and it appears you were trying to maximize the use of page space, your approach made it difficult to read your proposal.
Thank you. I thought we had some great graphics. Did they contribute to a clear understanding of our approach?
We appreciate graphics. However, if the graphic does not contribute to the explanation that you're providing, you may want to use that space for written explanations of what you're trying to demonstrate to us. A few of your graphics were also too small. We had to stop and make enlargements. It's really important that you ensure your graphics are legible and easy for us to understand when evaluating.
Nope, thank you for that feedback. I think that answers our questions.
This now concludes our post-award debriefing. Thank you for competing for CMS business.
Thank you for the debriefing.
Thank you.
Well, we got some answers, but I wish they could have shared more.
Yeah, we do know more than we did before. We have some specific things we can work on. We know a little bit more about CMS as an organization and kind of how they operate and what they're looking for. So I think we can keep trying, keep submitting proposals here.
I know that the non-price factors were significantly more important than price, and I guess the price differential was not significant enough to outweigh the higher technical rating of the winner, particularly since CMS indicated they had to adjust our price for cost reasonableness. So the winner was considered the best value when taking all those factors into account. Dang.
Next time we'll do better.
So in this scenario, the government made a defensible decision and shared this rationale with the industry, with Healthiest Corporation. For purposes of our time this morning, this was a very brief summary of strengths and weaknesses. In a real situation, we would expect more information to be provided on strengths and weaknesses and rationale. CMS did explain how Healthiest proposal was lacking relative to their stated evaluation factors. While still disappointed in losing out on this particular opportunity, Healthiest left the debriefing with a better understanding of their strengths and weaknesses this time and how they can improve in the future. Based on this interaction, they believe that their proposal was considered fairly, and they are likely to try to do business again with CMS in the future. This concludes our mock debriefing. So we're going to just highlight a couple of points out of our debriefing that we think are important. And these are, we believe, are important for both industry and government across the board to kind of prepare for a debriefing. So it's important to review all your source selection documents, your RFPs, from both sides of the coin. Have a detailed agenda when you come in. Outline all your talking points so you're prepared to have a good discussion. Clearly assign the roles and responsibilities to each of your team members. Draft an opening and closing statement. That helps kind of start and end the debriefing. Anticipate any kind of questions that might come up, prepare for answers, and stage at least one dry run before you actually meet with industry or with government from your respective side. So the benefits of a good debriefing. These are just a few, and we just want to kind of share them with everybody. Fostering a relationship of trust between government and industry is important. It helps industry continue to submit good proposals, and from the government side, it helps receive good proposals and not just throwing garbage over the wall. So I think fostering a relationship, having those discussions, interacting helps make it better next time. It improves the quality of future proposals. It also helps increase competition. So the more information you give out there, the more companies are willing to come and try it again, and it improves your competition rate next time. Debriefings and explanations can improve decision-making capabilities on both sides of the coin, enhance the quality of future proposals, which helps both the writer and the reviewer, reduce costly protests to obtain information, which everybody wants to try to avoid, and give industry the opportunity to provide feedback on the CMS procurement process. So those are just a few points we wanted to highlight. At this point, we'll take any questions that anybody might have for the panel. Everybody's shy today. I think everybody wants to go to lunch.
Lunch is waiting, I guess.
We're standing between lunch and everybody else. Oh, we see a brave soul getting up.
Hi, Mark Smolinski. I'm the director of the Division of Medicare and Marketplace Contracts. And is it possible, from your perspective, When you are asking for debriefing to quantify, are you using it more to find out how you can strengthen your future proposals, or are you using it to get talking or points for a potential protest?
So I'll start and then I'll let you guys jump in. But I personally like to use it for understanding where we went wrong, what we missed, and where we can do better next time. I think from my personal perspective, protest is probably the last thing on my mind when we go into a debriefing. We want to make it better next time. If we missed requirements, if we messed something up, we want to know about that, and we want to understand, how to make it better on both sides of the coin. So I think I personally lean more towards getting information to make it better next time rather than protest. Please, Roger.
I'm now speaking as a vendor. So, like Mark said, definitely we want to use this as a lessons learned experience, and protests are very expensive, so the last thing we want to do is protest. And especially if a debriefing is provided like the way it was in this mock debriefing with very specific examples of where the vendor fell short, chances are they will be offended because somebody didn't do a good job technically, but they will not protest. So that's my experience.
Yeah, I'll pile on. And if you think back to the first group where Cindy showed that big table of the timeline and all of the resources and people that get pulled into this, you'll see several of their roles are dedicated to writing proposals or doing graphics or doing solutioning. So we use the debrief really to get some understanding of kind of where things went wrong, to also take back within the company, because I think at times you have folks that support many different agencies, many different customers, and a writing style in VA is not going to work for a writing style in CMS. And sometimes you need those proof points to take back to the broader company to kind of share some of the things of where things went wrong. So that's really how we typically use it. I think we talked at the beginning, and I think they did a great job demonstrating kind of all the emotions, all the things that happen. It is painful. You do work on this for a long time, and by the time you did that 5th review, it could be garbage, but it looks like gold to you because you know what it's supposed to say, you know what you're telling CMS. Whether it's what you asked this is a whole different story. So it's really not going in to look to protest, it's going in to understand, I've read this paragraph 17,000 times and I thought it was great, and you said it was a weakness. I need to understand kind of why a little bit better.
And I'll add to that. I mean, at ICF, we ask for debriefs when we're awarded. We want to understand how we're communicating our solutions, what you're looking for in all cases.
I would also echo Corey. I mean, when we get notice of a loss and we break it to the team, there's a lot of emotion. They can be disappointed, angry, or outraged, whatever. And you've got to be able to walk them back and say, let's get that debrief to understand where did we go wrong. And oftentimes we will have missed something, or we didn't understand the importance of factors 2 and 3 compared to factors 5 and 6. So I would say generally, and I would echo Mark's point too, we look for a debrief when we win and when we lose so that we can improve our proposal process in the future. We don't want to make the same dumb mistakes and, have a bunch of eye rolling.
Yep, good point. Next.
Hi, I'm Deborah Hoffman. I'm with the Division of Beneficiary Support Contracts. And there are times where we've had recently where it's not that, so you have a B and a B plus, and you go with the B plus, and it's not that there was anything particularly wrong or weak about the proposal, it's just that you got one that was preferable. And we've had instances where we have contractors that keep coming back and asking for more and more information, and there's really nothing that you can substantially provide other than if you started digging into the winner's proposal, what they offered. And so that can be frustrating, I think, for both sides, and it's not clear for us. We've tried to get that across, but it tends to be, I lost, so somehow mine was, defective. And that's not always the case, and especially in IDIQs, I think we've seen this a lot, where we have a group, a cadre of contractors that have the capability. It's just that in certain proposals, one rises above the others. And so I would like to convey that too, that it's not always that you're weak or ineffective or your proposal, wasn't good. It was just that if had that other one not come in, you probably would have been the winner. So just thought that was worth noting too.
I think that's important feedback for industry. I mean, I know that in an IDIQ, for example, you can't award 100 of them. I mean, there's a limit to how many IDIQs you can manage. So that's important for us to be able to tell management, technical, and others.
Hi, I'm Kim Tatum. I just have a question. So a lot of debriefings, this is the ideal situation, but do you find with other agencies, I know time is of the essence sometimes, and sometimes we tend to do more debriefings via phone, or if you get a letter. Can you kind of address what you experience with other agencies with regard to face-to-face debriefings versus a letter versus just a phone, over the phone?
I think in my experience that phone is more common, and that's definitely preferred over a letter. I mean, the ability to ask a question, have some dialogue that really adds a lot of value.
Yeah, I mean, across the other agencies we're in, they do phone pretty regularly. We don't do too many in person. We do occasionally get written, and I agree, it's hard to, I mean, if you think losing hurts, reading 9 bullets of why you stink is even worse. So if we could do over the phone, that usually works, and that's been pretty consistent across some of the other HHS agencies I'm in.
In my experience, we did one recently with the DOD agency, and they scheduled time for upper management to come in, and we took the time to go in there, and it was an excellent debriefing, because we came out thinking that we fell short, and this was a fair competition, because I think that is what instills confidence in the vendors to compete on other opportunities. So we came out thinking that we should look for other opportunities. So it was a good experience overall for us.
So I've experienced everything, right, from an actual very detailed debriefing here at CMS. And I'm not going to mention names, but it was really very intense, down to the point, and here's what you can do better next time, and very detailed. It was a phone. So I do believe oral debriefings are better than letters, understanding that you can't have, if 18 bidders came in, you can't have 18 meetings with everybody. But we've gotten debriefing recently for a win as well, and that came in a letter. And I think that's fine, because it basically, here's why you won. Right? I'm not going to ask you a million questions. I just would like to see what the highlights were of why we won. To a DOD debriefing we got recently, well, it wasn't really a debriefing. It was a request for a debriefing and a response that said, well, we're not going to give you a debriefing. That was it. Right? So I think from the general experience that I've had over the years, CMS is very good in giving debriefings for the most part, understanding that people are busy. But oral debriefings are always, in my opinion, better than any kind of letter that you can get. Yes?
Hi, Evelyn Dixon. Just a quick comment on that statement about oral versus written. I had 18 contractors recently, and I gave them the option of oral versus written, and actually half went written and half went oral. Right. And I had a couple of cruel and mean ones that actually were oral. So that's something in the future. We're trying to help you. We're trying to give you, what happened in the process. But for you to be mean, cruel, and rude is definitely another factor as well, which makes us want to give you a written debriefing.
Right. I don't see any reason why anybody should be mean or cruel on either end of the phone, right? So it should be, a learning experience, like you said, and we from industry, my colleagues up here said, we use it as a learning experience. Whether we won or lost, we want a debriefing, we want to learn what we did wrong and what we did good, so we can continue doing good and fix the wrong. Being mean doesn't help anybody. I think it's just uncalled for and not necessary. Anybody else? Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, good afternoon. What a great experience today has been. Just wanted to take a quick opportunity. I see people rushing to get out of here, but first of all, I just want to do a couple of thank yous. I want to thank Bradley Saul from the Professional Services Council, Suzanne Charleston from the National Contract Management Association, and Dan Kane from the National Contract Management Association, the Woodlawn chapter, for coming together and helping to organize this event. And our very own Jason Vollmer, who couldn't be here today, who worked with them, and Carol Selvo over there. I'd like to thank all the people who came together for this event today. But a special, special, special thank you to all the vendors that came out and participated today and sharing a glimpse into your world. We thank you very much for that. It is important for us to hear from you, and we can take that glimpse now, and it will tremendously help us in the future in shaping our thinking. So we want to thank you for that. If you don't mind, I would love to give our vendors a round of applause for taking that time. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the acquisition community here at CMS for coming out. Thank you for the CSs, COs, cores, program and project managers for taking time out of your busy day for such an important event. We thank you for being here and participating. It is clear to me that moving forward in the future, we need to continue to do events like this. That this communication is very important. The two-way sharing back and forth is helpful for both government and for industry. And so I think it's very important for CMS to continue to do this, to have knowledge sharing and leverage what we can learn from you as well as what you can learn from us to help CMS complete its mission. Now, with that being said, I'm going to be very brief because I understand I'm the only thing now standing between you and lunch. So I simply want to say thank you very much.